Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Naruto x Tennyo Masaki x Washu Hakabi x Ryuko Hakudi? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Savage Thor for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. The group of genin had been gathered in front of a large fenced-off forest, which was training ground 44, also known as the Forest of Death, for the second exam. The first exam, which had been a written exam, had seen more than a few teams failed out of the exam. Unlike a regular written test, the purpose of Ibiki's was to cheat and not get caught doing it. Unlike some of the people in the room, Naruto hadn't had any subtle methods for cheating, and as such had spent much of his time staring down the proctor. As it was, he had only answered a few of the questions before banking on the 10th, which was an all-or-nothing deal that he had obviously been right on. The new proctor Mitarashi Anko was not as intimidating as Ibiki had been, but was in many ways just as scary for some, if not more so. Upon first glance and at a distance, you most likely wouldn't get that feeling of her. She stood at 5 feet 4 inches, had black hair with a violet tint held in a short, yet fanned-out ponytail, and pupilless light brown eyes. She wore a dark orange skirt over a mesh bodysuit along with a tan overcoat with a pair of shin guards and het leaf hidite strapped to her forehead to complete the look. Just from looking at her, you would not get a sense of intimidation from her, especially with the rather easygoing and playful demeanor she projected. Naruto, however, wasn't fooled, as he'd projected such a demeanor himself for years, and as such could see the rage hidden within the depths of her eyes. She led them to a large forested area surrounded by a fence that seemed to block off entrance. Already stationed were several chunin that stood at attention as soon as she arrived, hands clasped behind their backs and feet spread shoulders width apart. From the outside of the forest it didn't seem like much until a loud roar echoed across the place they occupied before being abruptly silenced within the next moment. "Alright maggots, welcome to the stage of the second test, training area 44, also known as the Forest of Death," said the woman. Forest of Death, yeah right, as if the hippie tree huggers could actually have such a place. The words had come from an IWA nin who snorted derisively only to seize up as quick as a flash. A kunai had sailed by his face, leaving a noticeable cut along his right cheek. In the next instant Anko had appeared behind him, holding the weapon to the frozen genin's neck. "You know, the ones like you are usually the first to die, spilling that deliciously red blood I like so much." Soon enough she was confronting a kusanin who had come at her, and while he normally would have ignored the entire thing, the look that the kusanin had sent in the direction of his team had put him on edge immediately. As soon as they locked eyes, a familiar feeling hit him, and he felt like he was on the road to Nami no Kuni all over again. "Naruto-kun, are you okay?" questioned a voice, snapping him out of his trance. Turning towards the voice, he was greeted to the sight of Hinata looking at him in worry. Taking a breath, he absently noted that his hands were shaking and quickly clenched them into fists a few times before offering her a small smile, which she returned with a relieved one of her own. "Hinata, I want you to avoid the team from Suna with the redhead, and the team that Kusanin is on," said the blonde after a moment. "Alright, listen up," called Anko, catching theirs and everyone else's attention. "As I already stated, this forest is the stage of the second exam. Your objective is to reach the tower located within its center, carrying with you these 2 scrolls, one marked heaven, one marked earth. You will have a total of 120 hours to reach the goal before this stage ends. Each team will be given one of the mentioned scrolls to carry before entrance, and each of you will enter from a different gate surrounding the forest. Before that, however, each of you are required to sign this document, which waives the Hidden Leaf Village from all responsibility should you die within the forest." 5 days, troublesome, moaned Shikamaru. Troublesome was definitely the way to describe the situation. Firstly, they were throwing a bunch of people who wanted to be professional killers into a large forest where deaths were expected. They were making them fight for a pair of scrolls, which meant half the teams in attendance would be eliminated as a guarantee. They would also have to deal with the creatures that called the place home as well. They were also expected to go in only with what they had on hand, and given the time limit, people would start to get desperate towards the end. Yes, the situation had troublesome stamped on it in large bold red letters. While the genin of the various villages were literally signing their lives away, the Sandaime Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen was occupied in conversation with Yosho, Eri and Minaho, all 4 with a cup of tea. For nearly an hour they had been speaking of the couple that had bonded together, and as it happened brought Clan Masaki down to the small planet that held Hai no Kuni. In her hands Eri held the photo album from the wedding of the yondaime and her daughter. It was one of the few to actually exist, as the wedding had been a very small affair. They had married at the fire temple with Hiruzen, Jiraiya and Tsunade to act as witnesses along with the fire daimyo. Hatake Kakashi was also there as the sole remaining student of the yondaime, as had the 3 students that Kushina had taken and the yondaime's specially selected bodyguards. Yosho, however, held the betrothal contract from the Huga clan in hand and was reading over it with focus. Hinata had been the only one that Naruto had accepted, but as of yet there was still no signature. That proved to be a good thing, as the more he read through it the more he found that whoever had written it had tried to sneak in several stipulations that would ensure that the Huga got the better deal out of the union. Rolling the piece of parchment up, the eldest prince of Jurai shook his head in disappointment. This was just one of the reasons that he hated politics. Tell me why it was so imperative that Naruto's heritage be hidden, even on his mother's side, said Yosho, causing the Sandaime to seemingly age even further before their eyes. Well, as you know, over his lifetime as a shinobi, Minato acquired many enemies outside of the village, especially during the Third Shinobi War. However, what most don't know is that he had several enemies inside of the village as well, stated Hiruzen, his eyes now tired looking instead of alert. When I handed over my title as Hokage to him, Minato immediately set about restructuring the village. Rumor has it that several members of the council were being encouraged to step down from their positions. He was about to restructure the training of the shinobi on the roster, and those within the academy. He had even set a meeting with the daimyo about the banning and removal of the Huga clan's curse seal. As for Kushina, she had also made her fair share of enemies. She was the heiress of the Uzumaki clan and had inherited the title of daimyo herself, which she never claimed. More than that, Yuzuno Kuni is very rich in minerals, and many have been trying to gain possession of those minerals. However, she was also a force of nature on the battlefield with her abilities with water-style ninjutsu, kenjutsu, and her mastery of the Uzumaki clan fuinjutsu. She was just as big a threat as Minato was. When she was younger, the Sandaime Reikage tried to have her kidnapped, and nearly succeeded if not for Minato picking up on the clues she'd been leaving behind, which everyone else overlooked. In response to that, I had him killed. The current Reikage happens to be the man's son and part of the team sent to capture her. The Sandaime paused here, seemingly not noticing the reaction of the woman's family as he set about loading and lighting his pipe. Taking a long drag, he held the smoke in before releasing slowly, with his body relaxing on the exhale. Fiddling around in his drawer, he pulled out a picture before handing it over to Eri. Looking the picture over, she could see that the picture had captured 3 women, in the center of which was her daughter in her form of Kushina, appearing to be around her early 20s. Beside her to the right was the woman she recognized as the memory they'd watched, who she believed was called Mikoto the Younger. Finally, to her left was another woman, this one with long dark blue hair and fair skin, with hair falling towards her back and bangs framing her face. Her eyes were that of the Byakugan, only with a shade of lavender thrown into the mix. Her best friends were Uchiha Mikoto and Huga Hanar. The Huga and Uchiha clans had a very heated rivalry and disdain for each other, but Kushina managed to bring those two together, and the clans themselves began to move towards peace, especially with Hanar and Mikoto at the heads as matriarchs. If that wasn't enough, the 3 of them were quite involved with the goings-on of the village, and had managed to get on the bad side of the Merchants Guild along with several other powerful players. Several of those people had been smuggling drugs into the village, and they took it very personally, especially when the woman who trained them died of an overdose. They exposed several major links in the chain, but before they could get the head, the Kyuubi struck and Kushina died. Jiraiya was here immediately afterwards as Naruto's godfather, and is the major reason that the council couldn't kill him before I was able to retake the position of Hokage. I stayed for 3 years before suddenly a rumor popped up in Iwa that the Yondaime Hokage had an heir living in Konoha. When murmurs of an Uzumaki heir started fluttering around shortly afterwards, I determined that there had to be a leak, and told the council he was a simple orphan, and that I gave him the Uzumaki name to honor Kushina, who was very active with the orphanage. The rumors stopped flying within a week, but not before Jiraiya had killed 3 teams of Iwa shinobi and 2 from Kumo. I expected Jiraiya would come straight back, but he instead sent word that he had heard mutterings of the whereabouts of his old teammate who was revealed to have been a sociopath a year earlier and fled the village. The man had joined a group of runaway shinobi, all of them with the strength of High Jounin, or even that of a Kage. Understandably shaken, he set about creating his own spy network and discovered that the group was after the bijou for an unknown purpose, which meant eventually they'd come after Naruto. For the last few years we've been trying but come up with surprisingly little information regarding them. Finished the sandaime, Naruto stood in one of the higher branches of a tree within the Forest of Death. Already the forest was living up to his name, as barely 15 minutes and a horrified scream had echoed across the forest before being abruptly cut off. After turning in the forms, each team was presented with a scroll, though hidden from view by a tent from the other teams. His team had been presented with a heaven scroll which he had pocketed, much to Sasuke's ire. At the moment, though, he was scowling as he had thought that the higher vantage point would allow him to get a better look at his surroundings. However, the canopy of the forest made that impossible. While the trees seemed more spread out on the ground, the higher up you went, the more compact the place seemed to become. In order to actually see anything, he'd have to go to one of the lower branches where the chances of him being seen were much higher. That really didn't bother him so much as seeing as how he and his team had split up. He had summoned his hellhounds some time ago. When they had determined that they would have to split up for a bit, he hadn't hesitated in leaping away, knowing that one of them would have to stay with Sakura. Don't get him wrong, Sakura was starting to grow on him, and had been since they had left Wave. She had stopped screeching so much, and was even beginning to take her training seriously as well. She still wasn't much, but she was putting up the effort, which was enough for him to give her a chance, especially since she wasn't his ass due to learning of his heritage. Sasuke, on the other hand, he was liking less and less as time progressed. So the decision to leave Sakura with him was more of a bit of petty revenge, as he knew that the Uchiha still couldn't stand the pink-haired girl. His thoughts on the matter was cut off as a flash of red shot across his vision. Deep growling had him looking up to see a large bear running by that had caught the attention of the hounds. Shaking his head, he motioned them to go, and the three took off, quickly chasing down the bear as one of them leaped atop its back, forcing it to the ground. The three girls wasted no time in tearing into it, causing the beast to howl in pain and anger. Finally, one of them managed to snag down the beast's neck before twisting savagely, forcing the bear's wail to immediately come to a halt. Descending down from the branches, he came upon the sight of a young girl leaned against a tree and panting heavily. She had red hair and wore a pair of black pants and a beige shirt underneath which he could see the top of a mesh shirt. She wore a pair of glasses that did nothing to distract from her red eyes and a kusa haidite. Unknown to the blonde, while the girl was once taking in deep breaths in an effort to calm her panic-stricken heart, she was now using every ounce of her willpower to keep herself grounded. The literal sea of chakra she could feel just waiting to be unleashed by the blonde was staggering, and the feelings behind it were nearly causing her to swoon. "Hey, you alright?" questioned the blonde. Fine," answered the girl, with Naruto ignoring the stutter. "Your team?" questioned Naruto, only for silence to be his answer. "I'll give you an escort to the gates. The proctors should let you out once you explain the situation." That said, and before she could speak, her breath was stolen away as his chakra surged briefly, and he summoned 3 shadow clones. The feeling of such a huge amount of chakra hitting her so closely, and so suddenly, had her knees weakening, though she managed to steady herself rather quickly. "Kamiko," called the blonde after a quick whistle. Immediately one of the hound's heads perked up from the mauling of the dead bear, and she trotted over to him, for which he proceeded to clean off her muzzle with a rag he pulled from his pocket. Looking at the hound, the girl wondered just where the blonde had found such a thing, or if they were some type of never-before-seen summon, as she'd never seen creatures like those before. With his back to the girl, she missed the fact that he lifted up his goggles in order to look the hound in the eyes. No words were spoken, but the hound tilted its head to the side as Naruto patted on the side. "Be a good girl and take her to the gates, okay?" The entire time he spoke, he did not look away from the hound's eyes. However, the hound obviously understood, as it licked him along the cheek before bounding over to the girl. The redhead tensed as the hound neared, only for it to lie down in an obvious invitation. Slowly climbing so that she straddled the creature's back, she turned just in time to see the blonde turn to leap off. "Wait, who are you?" questioned the girl. "The name's Naruto." With that he leapt away, leaving a blushing girl behind at least before the hound suddenly leapt to its feet and took off, in which case she could only hold on for dear life. While this unknowingly life-altering meeting was taking place, Hinata moved at a brisk pace through the forest, her Byakugan eyes blazing. She had surprised her team by immediately taking charge as soon as they had entered the gates. Byakugan eyes active, she had led them to a team of fellow Leaf Nin whom they had managed to lead into a trap and negotiate the needed scroll out of. At this point she was now leading them directly to the tower, going far around the Suna Nin Naruto had warned her of, and dodging any group of Kumo Nin that even entered her range of vision. As it was the only thing keeping Kiba from complaining about the pace, and the fact that they were heading directly to the tower was the pace that they were setting. Despite their time as a team until that point, it wasn't until now that they realized that if they weren't carefully watching her, Hinata could disappear in an instant. This fact was even further enforced by her small stature, and the fact that she tended to not try to bring attention to herself, as shown by the way she dressed and usually carried herself. Already he had lost track of her completely at least twice, and if not for Shino would have been left wondering where she had disappeared to. In an instant Hinata had leapt down a level, and the two males were quick to copy the action, going wide-eyed at the huge snake that literally flew through the spots they'd have occupied. On the lower level, Hinata was given the chance to show a whole new range of movement to her teammates, as she dodged around branches and tree trunks before leaping upwards once more, the two males following, just barely avoiding the startled Leaf Nin that they came across. However, never ones to take opportunities for granted, Kiba and Shino reacted quickly, grabbing a rather thick branch and using it to combine their momentum into a turnaround, nailing two of them in the face with a pair of swing kicks that sent them flying from the branches and slamming into a tree trunk, each leaving consciousness at one point or another. Hinata likewise had quickly reacted and doubled back, nailing the other in the back with a quick series of juken strikes along the spine that quickly rendered them paralyzed, if only temporary. Score. At the call, both Shino and Hinata turned to see Kiba rifling through their down-praised supplies and holding up a scroll which he quickly tossed to Shino, who pocketed it. Grabbing a spool of ninja wire from the down Nin's supplies, the members of Team 8 quickly went about tying them to the tree trunks before taking off once more, only now with an extra scroll. Upon reaching regular seeing distance of the tower, the trio leapt from the trees and hauled ass, due to the fact that there was no cover surrounding the tower, so to make it inside was a dead sprint. It would be because of this that the tale would spread how Team 8 shattered the record for completion of the second exam by completing it within 45 minutes. Within the confines of her lab, Washu held up the gem that held the power and consciousness of the QB, finally stabilized. It had taken her some time to stabilize the gem, as she had needed the other half of the QB's power to do so, which required drawing out what Minato had sealed within his own body. Finally, however, the process was completed, and the now finished gem dwarfed Ryuko's, appearing about the size of a snow globe. She had learned much from it, especially in the possibilities that existed with Fuinjutsu. To think that on what was perhaps the most underdeveloped planet in the galaxy they had figured out a way to manipulate dimensions was incredible. Of course, they weren't up to her level in the ability with it, but the fact that they could create small pocket dimensions put them ahead of even Jiraiya and the researchers of the Galaxy Academy in the field of study. Sitting the gem down, she connected with the interface of her computer and watched as it flew through the information available at a quick pace. "So what do you think?" questioned the diminutive genius. The response was the gem actually glowing brightly for a moment before dying down. "Yes, I thought you would like it. It's still only half done, but it's coming along nicely," said Washu. As she said this, her hands began flying over the keyboard as she navigated her way through the system, all the while the gem pulsing with red light. "Oh Tsunami, your little tree ships aren't going to be nothing compared to these," muttered Washu with a smirk. If anything, the sphere glowed even brighter at her words. After all, there was nothing like sibling rivalries. Elsewhere in the village, Sasami suddenly sneezed, just barely managing to turn away from the food in front of her. Beside her, Aika paused in her own eating, only to be waved off by her younger sister. At the moment, they were at Ichiraku's, a place Sasami had been frequenting quite often lately. Out of all of the members of the Masaki clan, Sasami spent the most time in the village proper, as she was often spending time with Naruto. The first time she had come with Naruto, and he had introduced her to Ayam and her father Tuchi, they had hit it off great, and she quickly realized the true reason for why Naruto wanted to spend so much time at the stand. When she had first been revealed to be one of Naruto's relatives to them, which Naruto had done with no hesitation, they had welcomed her with open arms. She and Ayam had become fast friends, and once revealed that she did the cooking for her household, began swapping recipes almost eagerly. She was happy she had decided to bring her own sister along this time, as the mood of the place had even broken through Aika's training and forced her into laughter at some of the stories Ayam shared about Naruto. However, Ayam proved to be a well of information on all things Naruto, and not just his time as Konoha's prankster prince, but she knew a side of the blonde that even the Sandaime hardly knew of. When she had finally revealed to Ayam that she and Naruto were to marry, Ayam had told her point blank that Naruto's heart was fragile, and she would have to be very careful with him. "So what's your home like?" questioned Ayam as she leaned on the counter, this being a slow point of the day. Jiraiya is a lot like Konoha actually, in that it is surrounded by forests, though of course there are differences. The people are of course very proud, and our military is second to none, stated Aika, slowly trying to keep some things out of the conversation. "The last few years, however, we've been living away from Jiraiya, I suppose in what you would call our clan's second home. Things are a lot simpler there, as there is far less violence or pressure for much. You don't get out of school legally until age 18 there, and even then there is a lot of pressure to continue even further in order to get a decent job," finished the girl. "Naruto-kun would hate that. He always says he became a ninja to get out of school," said Ayam with a laugh. Back with the subject of their conversation, Naruto frowned as he listened to Sakura inform him of what had happened with she and Sasuke while he had been on his own. Sasuke himself was incapable of speaking, as he'd been ridden unconscious by some freaky grass nin. According to Sakura, they had been attacked not even 5 minutes after he had left them. The attack had come out of nowhere, as they were struck by a strong blast of wind that worked in separating them. When they recovered and met back up, the grass nin immediately attacked, focusing exclusively on Sasuke and taunting him the entire time while he was at it. Finally, Sasuke had revealed his Sharingan, and just when it looked he would come out fine, the grass nin struck fast and strong, pinning him to a tree, and proceeded to bite him on the neck, where he screamed until he passed out. Looking at his neck, he could almost immediately tell that it was a seal of some sort. While he'd been doing much reading up on Fuinjutsu, he wasn't up to the point where he could recognize what a seal was just by looking at it. Tucking him into the burrow of a tree, he turned to face Sakura, who was staring down at the boy. "Well, camp out here as long as we can. As we are now going through the forest, would be a bad idea with him down. If push comes to shove, though, I'll summon the girls again, and we'll haul ass to the tower," said Naruto. "We can't go to the tower without both scrolls," reminded Sakura, busying herself by placing a rag on the Uchiha's head. "You just worry about the team, I'll worry about the scroll," said Naruto, getting a nod from the pink-haired Kunoichi. With that discussion over with, Naruto sat himself down near the back of the tree. He would allow the day to go by and then strike at night when everyone else was trying to settle in. That was good for him, as it allowed him time to go over his bag of tricks. His taijutsu and his blades would probably work to his best advantage, especially when used in conjunction with the Kirigakyu no Jutsu. With the boost in his senses, he would most likely be able to tell where any and all opponents would be within the mist, and since he couldn't use it quite like Zabuza at this point, if he added his Kage Bunshin into the equation, it would make things a lot harder on his opposition. Of course, he always had the other technique from the Forbidden Scroll he'd learned that he had been keeping in reserve. The problem with it was that it still wasted a boatload of energy, and as such, with his control, he'd only be able to use it maybe 3 times before he was spent for the day, and with his reserves, that said a lot. He also had another move that he was in the process of developing. In truth, it had been inspired by the move he picked up from the scroll, but it was coming along slowly. Due to his poor control, he didn't want to risk doing it himself, and as such had his shadow clones doing it in his spare time. Unfortunately, that wasn't what it used to be, and without the Kyuubi to refill his reserves like he used to, he didn't use as many shadow clones as he once did. That, however, was something he now had to live with, and as such it had forced him to learn to fight smarter, not just harder. He had rededicated himself to his stealth training, which had helped him plenty during his time pranking, as had his trap-making skills. Even more, without Yoshio's ki, it took him too much concentration to form energy shields at this point in time. So going in like he originally would have was a no-go. Everything would have to be done sneakily as opposed to an all-out assault. For the next few days they could stay in the burrow of the tree while Sasuke recovered, with Naruto being the only one to venture out unless Sakura felt the urge to go handle her personal matters. Finally darkness arrived and Naruto could wait no longer, and that night headed out of the burrow of the tree. Moving swiftly up the truck he reached one of the mid-level branches and stood stock still for but a moment. Lowering his goggles so that they dangled around his neck, his now glowing silver eyes took in all that surrounded him. From her position within the forest, Fu sat at the very top of a tree, her orange eyes staring up at the stars. Her so-called teammates were down on the ground away from her, which she had no problem with. In truth, she hated her teammates. Not only that, she hated the village and its inhabitants, and the only reason she was a kunoichi was because it let her leave. She had been hated by everyone for as long as she remembered, simply because the village leader decided to use her to seal one of the bijou into, this one being the Nanabai no Kabutomashi. Because of this she was considered an outcast by the villagers, especially due to the fact that she was an orphan, just unlucky enough for the village leader to have picked her out of a bunch at random. She didn't care, though she had determined that humans were trash. They spoke one thing, but their actions told of an entirely different story. They were barbarians in every sense of the word. Her escape from reality was the stars. They fascinated her for as long as she could remember. Was there life out there? Was there a more evolved civilized culture, or was it just as barbaric as that of the humans? Her dream was to one day grow powerful enough so that she could fly out and investigate the stars for herself, and even if she found nothing she would never return to this world. Chome, her bijou, had told her that it could be possible that once she gained full control of her power she could perhaps make the trip. Chome had never tried, having no need to. After all, Chome was a top-tier bijou. There weren't many things more powerful, and before he was sealed away had never considered itself threatened in any conceivable way by humans. At the moment none of these things were truly on her mind. Instead it was the two boys she had met before the exam. Unlike other girls, she really didn't think about boys in a manner of UAL attraction. As far as she was concerned, the only reason for such a thing was in the interest of procreation, which she held no interest in at all. No, her interest in them came from the feelings they had invoked in her, a sense of familiarity. Chome had told her it was because they were like her. The redhead Gaara was practically flooding with Shikaku's power, while the blonde Naruto held only a faint feeling of Kyuubi's power, suggesting he didn't much use it, unlike Gaara. She could understand that, as she herself didn't have much control of Komiai's power, though she freely used the abilities it had granted her as a host. She had never put much thought in the others. She knew, of course, that Kumo, Iwa, Suna, and Kiri had all held bijou, but there was never any indication of the Kyuubi ever being sealed. She wondered, were their lives like her own, or were they treated better than she was? Did they have better control of the bijou chakra than she did, or were they in the same boat as far as control was concerned? In all honesty, she was tempted to just run off and search them out, but was forcing herself to wait. They would all meet up soon enough and her questions would be answered. Even more, she would finally have worthy opponents to test her skills against. Yes, they would do battle and it would be glorious. Elsewhere, Niju sat with a contemplative frown on her face. She had been awoken from a rather vivid dream with her forehead drenched in sweat. As the former high priestess of Melmoth, she was a very high-level telepath. Her dreams more often than not were actually visions of probable futures to come, and she was very good at manipulating those probabilities so that the one in her favor won out in the end. Despite the fact that she looked no more than 11 years old, she was over 2,000, and as such had lived long enough to get very good at it. That was what had led to her current life as a galaxy detective, and one of Seina's wives. "Penny, for your thoughts, dear," came a voice startling her. Looking up, she was greeted to the sight of Lady Sito, the only one of Jiraiya's council members to have stayed on Furia. She understood the motive well. While Yosho was good, he had learned from Sito, and she had not taught him all of her tricks. When it came to politics, the Devil Princess of Jiraiya, as she was called, had no equal. She took a moment to reflect on whether or not she wished to share what she saw with the other woman. At this moment she was in a position to one day become a queen of Jiraiya and rule over all of the empire. However, she had already been leader of her own planet, and realized the type of work that would entail. More than that, she rather quickly remembered the purpose for their coming to the planet in the first place, and thus a decision was made. I had a vision, stated Niju quietly, causing Sito to raise an eyebrow. For someone of my level, visions are not unheard of, though they are rare. They represent probable, most likely futures to come, explained Niju. And what is it you saw? Questioned Sito. Naruto's death. While this meeting was taking place, another was happening, this time involving the Sandaime, Kakashi, and Jiraiya. The white-haired man had arrived in the village no more than an hour previous to the current time, and for the first bit he and his sensei had played catch-up while they waited for Kakashi to arrive. Now that he had arrived, the atmosphere was completely different, as the three men were all business at this point in time, as they caught Jiraiya up with everything that had happened with Naruto that the Sandaime hadn't felt comfortable writing down. So we were right in our hypothesis of what caused the Kyuubi's release, said Jiraiya after learning of how the fox was released. Indeed, and the usage of space/time ninjutsu makes the situation more troublesome, said Hiruzen, releasing a cloud of smoke from his mouth. How did he take it? Questioned Jiraiya. The same way his mother did when she found out about the attack on Uzushio, answered the old man, causing the Sandaime to wince. He started reading up on Fuinjutsu, but he's left the actual application alone. From what I'm told, his handwriting is apparently atrocious, so they're working with him to fix it, stated Kakashi, joining the conversation. So what all can he do? Questioned Jiraiya. I've gotten him decent with Sensei's taijutsu style, which is mostly what we work on, though he's incorporated a pair of saber claws into the style, stated Kakashi, causing the man to whistle. Those would be brutally effective, stated Jiraiya. I've also tested him for his elemental affinity. He has both wind and water, so strong the paper actually shredded itself into 4 pieces before each piece became soaked in water. So far he's learned 3 water techniques, which were part of a scroll Zabuza gave him, and 2 wind techniques, all offensive in nature. Along with that, he can use the Kage Bunshin technique and create chakra shields to protect himself, explained Kakashi. Sounds like quite the skill set, said Jiraiya, his mind already flying to figure out a way to work with that. So what is Kushina's family like? Questioned the Sannin. The Masaki clan is larger than expected from the time she was among them. There are actually more females than males, it seems, mostly through marriage. For the most part they are all pretty much normal people who actually pass as civilians for the most part. The only one who doesn't really pull it off is the Emperor's eldest daughter Ika, but she spends the majority of her time within the Senju compound, explained Hiruzen. Man, I'd have paid to see the council's reaction to him being of the Senju clan, said Jiraiya with a laugh. It was interesting. 1 minute they were giving him the evil eye, and all of a sudden they were demanding that he stays in Konoha, even going so far as to call him a valuable member of our village, stated Kakashi, causing Jiraiya to snort. Naruto didn't buy it for an instant, said Hiruzen, shaking his head. The conversation was suddenly stopped as a series of knocks echoed on the door before Sito made her way in, followed by Niju. Raising an eyebrow at their entrance, and resisting the urge to call the woman out on the action, all 3 men felt their heartbeats skip at her words. We have a problem. It was morning when they made their way into the clearing that housed Team 7 for the past days. From her position within the burrow, Sakura looked them over. In the center was someone who had bandages covering most of his face, leaving only his left eye uncovered. He also wore a large poncho with long sleeves, a snake-patterned scarf around his neck, a bundle of straw protruding from the back of his scarf, and a large metal thing on his right arm and hidite on his forehead. To his left was a girl with very long black hair, almost reaching down to the ground, tied by a violet ribbon right near the end, and black eyes. She wore a pale green vest somehow similar to a flak jacket, and snake-patterned pants and scarf, and hidite on the forehead. Finally, to the right was another boy with spiky, dark hair and dark eyes. He wore a beige shirt with 2 black stripes and 3 prints of the kanji for death down the front. Like his teammates, he also wore the snake-patterned scarf around his neck. While he also wore his village symbol on his forehead, he didn't wear just a simple cloth like the others, but also wore a hapuri beneath the cloth. However, the thing that caught her attention the most was the village symbol, as it was one she had never seen before, that of a musical note. She remained perfectly still, continuing to feign sleep even as they approached. Suddenly, without warning, a barrage of shuriken were launched down at them from the treetops. The one on the right simply raised his hand upwards and the shuriken were sent sailing back in the direction they had come from. Suddenly a large log came flying at them only for the one in the center to step forward and swing a punch, causing the log to actually shatter. In the next instant the kunoichi motioned them to stop and pulsed her chakra, dispelling the genjutsu that had put up around them before Sakura was even able to make proper use of it, and revealing her perched up in a low branch of the tree. "Nice try, little girl, but you'll have to do much better than that," said the one on the left. "What do you want?" questioned Sakura with narrowed eyes. "Uchiha Sasuke, wake him up," stated the one in the middle. "Why?" questioned the girl. "So we can kill him," said the girl with a smirk. "I have a better idea," came a new voice, surprising them and causing them to look up and see Naruto standing behind them at the edge of the clearing, his goggles up and covering his eyes. "Leave now and you can leave here alive," said the blonde. "Ha! As if something like that will happen. We're not here for some stupid exam. Our only purpose here is the Uchiha's death," said the boy on the right. "Then you leave me no choice," said the blonde. Suddenly Sakura's eyes widened as mist began to make its way into the clearing from all sides. Very quickly all of them found themselves unable to see anything aside from themselves. Even those right next to them were only just barely visible. "You have 8 choices. The larynx, spine, lungs, liver, jugular vein, brain, kidney, and heart. Now tell me, which vital organ do you want to get struck at?" "Hey, yeah right, I'll blow this shit right out of here," exclaimed the one on the left. "No you won't," whispered a voice in his ear, causing his eye to widen. Faster than he could react, metal pierced flesh, and no movement was made to muffle his cry of shock and pain before it was abruptly cut off. "Shit, Zaku!" The exclamations of his teammates were all they were able to get out before they were suddenly launched away from each other with the feeling as if they'd got struck by a sledgehammer. Both managed to recover quickly enough to land on their feet, but the attack had been more than enough to separate and isolate them from one another. Suddenly the male spun around and threw out a right punch, hearing a sound coming from behind him, and was satisfied to see the body crumple to the ground. "You think some mist is really going to help you? I'm from Odo, fool. All I need to is sound," said the boy snidely. "So that's the name of your village, good to know." With that the blonde before him burst into smoke, much to his shock. Before he could recover from his shock, a form pounced on top of him, slamming him into the ground. Meanwhile the lone kunoichi was circling her position with 3 saban needles held in each hand between the cracks of her balled fists. For several long minutes Naruto just watched as she turned every which way, trying to anticipate an attack. He knew from experience that the longer you made someone wait, the jumpier they became when using this technique. Just to add a little something extra for the situation, he allowed the mist to begin dissipating, and after but a few moments she went wide-eyed at the crumpled forms of her teammates. Suddenly she was launched forward and he quickly dropped to the ground as she went flying right over his head before hitting the ground and rolling about 3 feet before coming to a stop. Sure enough, as he looked up he could see Sakura standing where the Odo kunoichi had once been, head down, and fists still clenched and extended in the spot her head had once been. Naruto shivered just slightly as phantom pain throbbed on the back of his head, but quickly shook it off and stood to his feet. Already the mist was nearly completely gone, and he quickly pulled the chakra from his eyes, allowing their regular blue hue to make its return before standing back to his feet. As he settled his goggles back over his eyes, he paused as the memories of a dispelled clone came to him. Apparently the clone had the same idea he'd had and had lessened the density of the mist after seeing Sakura walking in from its position, and she had quickly managed to zero in on the Odo kunoichi. Still, her training must have been going better than he thought if she had managed to channel that monstrous strength of hers consciously like she just did. "What the hell was that?" exclaimed a familiar voice before either member of Team 7 could say a word. Turning, both saw Ino come storming out of the bushes. Behind her came Choji and Shikamaru, both shaking their heads at the antics of their teammate as she and Sakura quickly got into one of their standoffs with the 3 boys, all tuning them out with practiced ease. The revelry was cut short, however, as all of them felt a chakra surge shoot up out of nowhere. Even Naruto, who had trouble sensing the chakra of others through his own, took notice of it. Turning towards it, they were all shocked with the sight of Sasuke standing hunched over and surrounded by a deep purple chakra that looked akin to a fire, with 2 rings circling him, similar to a cyclone in appearance. As he stood, they could all see a strange glowing orange marking spreading across the exposed surfaces of his body until finally the markings had spread fully and solidified into black flame-like markings. As Sasuke-kun, what? Started Sakura before trailing off in her shock. Don't worry, I feel fine, said Sasuke as he looked up, a pair of red eyes with two Tomo-like markings within staring out at them before he looked down and clenched his fist. In fact, I feel better, more powerful than ever, said the Uchiha before suddenly his eyes seemed to gain a sharp focus onto Naruto. Let's see you keep up now, dope. With that, the Uchiha vanished before appearing directly behind the blonde, sending a back fist at his head. Taken by surprise by the sheer speed just displayed, the blonde was struck full force and sent flying before managing to flip so that he landed on his feet, though he skid nearly another 3 feet. Already the Uchiha was going through a chain of seals and surprised everyone as he breathed out multiple small but fast fireballs. Eyes narrowed in anger, Naruto summoned an energy shield which blocked not only the fireballs but the shuriken the Uchiha had hidden within them. As Sasuke appeared behind him once again, Naruto was ready, ducking the blow aimed at the back of his head and sending out a mule kick with both legs connecting solidly, and sending the Uchiha skidding back due to the strength behind it. As they eyed each other after the exchange, Naruto slid into a stance that none of them had seen before from him. He had turned his left side facing Sasuke, his left leg leading and bent, while his right hand was cocked back at his hip, while his left was out front, his fingers curled like claws. Then, quick as a whip, Naruto shot forward, crossing the distance in a flash, moving much faster than anyone there had thought him capable of. Sasuke's Sharingan was the only thing allowing him to track the movement. However, just because you could see something doesn't mean you could stop it, a lesson he learned as Naruto's right fist was soon embedded within his gut, folding him over with all the breath leaving him, and his jaw literally hanging open. His mouth was snapped closed as a left uppercut nailed him in the jaw before, to the eyes of those watching, Naruto's arms became blurs. For Sasuke, however, he could see every punch the blonde fired off coming, yet could do nothing as his body was put through the single worst physical beating he'd ever gotten, with just 11 punches to the chest before a final punch launched him back first into a tree. As Naruto moved to launch himself forward again, he was stopped from going after the Uchiha again by a hand placing itself on his shoulder. Out of the corner of his eye he could see that it was Choji that was holding him back, though not him, who spoke up. Leave him, you still need him for the exam. Let them deal with the troublesome bastard at the tower. The voice was Shikamaru's, only more serious than Naruto had ever heard him being. For a moment he actually considered ignoring him and beating the Uchiha 6 ways to Sunday, but instead gritted his teeth and took the advice as he watched the strange markings on the Uchiha recede before turning his back on him and walking with Choji and Shikamaru. In the distance, a pair of Byakugan eyes closed and deactivated as their owner turned away from the scene. He had been doing a routine scan of his surroundings when he had come upon the scene and had watched out of simple curiosity. Because of this, he now knew that both the blonde and the Uchiha could be some to be wary of should they face off, even if they were still fated to lose. At the same time, outside of the forest, the gathering was taking place within the only shinobi-run bar and grill within the village. It was a place where only Leaf Shinobi or former Leaf Shinobi of Chunin rank or higher could enter or even know of its existence. It was a place where the ninja were free to let down their emotional masks and be themselves and not the warriors they presented themselves as. At the moment, however, its occupants all sat by in surprise as a number of people entered one by one, who hardly even associated with each other. One by one they arrived and were led into the same room, which served as a private VIP room. The first to arrive had come in at the same time and were the famed trio of Yamanaka Inoichi, Naro Shikaku and Akimichi Chuza, the most famous incarnation of the legendary Inoshikacho formation to date. The next to arrive was Aburaim Shibi, whose appearance was noticed due to the fact that he never came there except for on the rare occasion. Huga Hayashi was the next to enter, and like the previous entry, catching all attention due to the rarity of the occasion. Finally came Inuzuka, and with her throwing everyone for a loop was Ichiraka Tuchi. They greeted each other warmly with none of the usual indifference from when most of them usually met up. Even Hayashi's emotionless mask had left his features as one by one they all greeted each other, with the door sealing itself after opening on last time for the waiter to deliver 4 bottles of sake. In the history of the Hidden Leaf there had never been a generation like them, They were legends within the village. Even if they were not held to the level of the Sannin, they were still legends nonetheless. It's been a long time since we gathered like this, said Chuza with a nostalgic smile on his face. Yeah, because it's usually not a good thing, said Sim. After she spoke, everyone took a moment of respectful silence. The last time they had all gathered had been when they mourned the deaths of Uchiha Mikoto and Fugaku after learning of the Uchiha massacre 4 years previous. It had affected them all, especially Shibi and Hayashi, who had been Fugaku's teammates, as genin. Before that, it had been to mourn Hayashi's wife Hitome, who had died shortly after the birth of her second child the year before. Before that, it had been to mourn Minato and Kushina, who had died during what they had thought to be a random attack by the Kyuubi and not a sacrificial murder by a man as they now all knew it to be. Tuchi, how long have you known about Naruto? Questioned Inoichi with a serious frown as he turned to regard his old friend. It was no wonder why he asked him the question. Not only was Naruto a religiously regular customer at the man's ramen stand, but Tuchi had alongside Sim been Minato's teammate. For a moment all was silent as all eyes turned to the man awaiting his answer. Tuchi, however, was silent, instead pouring himself a bit of sake and taking a quick drink before turning to return Inoichi's stare. I've known since the first time he came into the stand when he was 4, said the man seriously, causing several eyes to widen. And you couldn't tell us? Demanded Hayashi in a very rare show of anger from him. I would have if some of you would follow up when given invitations, stated Tuchi, causing several eyes to narrow before widening in understanding before most of the heads bowed in shame. Still, even I never thought he was this important, mused Tuchi, taking another drink. A prince of an entire ing planet, said Inoichi, tossing one straight back in a single go. Understatement. I went through that packet, all that information made my head hurt, said Hayashi as he himself took a drink. To think we're so far behind, and yet so far ahead, said Sim, shaking her head. It seems a simple concept. From my understanding, our planet is much more hazardous than others. It is no surprise that we have developed differently, stated Shibi. They may beat us technologically, but as far as physically, that is a completely different matter, said Chuza. True enough, and that's not even counting what we can do factoring in chakra, said Tuchi. Still can't help but wonder what they want with us to invite us into space so readily, stated Shikaku with a frown. Well, I want you brats to step up your training, honestly, came a new voice, surprising everyone, causing Chuza to spew out his sake while Inoichi choked in surprise before they turned to see Jiraiya leaning against the wall. Damn it, how the hell do you still do that, old man? Exclaimed Sim, pointing at the man, causing Jiraiya to smirk, which only irritated her more before he suddenly turned serious. As of right now, it doesn't matter what the Jiraiyans want with us. We've just discovered an invasion set to take place on the day of the 3rd exam, stated Jiraiya, causing them all to freeze. The leaders of this attack are the new village called Otogekure. They are led by Orochimaru, stated Jiraiya. They shouldn't be much trouble even with Orochimaru leading them, sensei, said Sim. Suna, it seems, will be aiding them, said Jiraiya, causing her to slam her head on the table. The leaders' summit that sensei is calling won't take place until the next day, and the word hasn't even been sent out yet, said Jiraiya, so we've got a month to prepare, said Shikaku, his mind already flying through strategies. Whatever you plan, know that me, the old man, and Tsunade will be taking care of Orochimaru, said Jiraiya. I figured she'd come back once she found out about Naruto, said Tuchi. Apparently the elders told her he died, but we'll handle that another day, said Jiraiya. With all of the leaders here for the exam, we'll have to utterly crush this invasion, said Hayashi contemplatively. Which is why I have missions for all of you. Listen up, said Jiraiya with authority. By the time the evening was rolling around, Team 7 and 10 were entering the tower. Though Team 10 hadn't collected the needed scroll for them to pass, Naruto had no problem supplying them with what they needed. Upon entering the tower and reading the small plaque upon a nearby wall, Shikamaru had immediately come to the conclusion that they were supposed to open the scrolls, a decision which Sakura almost immediately vetoed. Naruto, however, ignored her, having learned previously to trust Shikamaru's brain and his word. The scrolls, once opened, quickly revealed themselves to be summoning scrolls which had summoned Iruka and another Chunin that Naruto, Shikamaru, and Choji recognized as Kiba's sister Hana. After their congratulations were given and they explained the true meaning of the plaque, Shikamaru surprised everyone by speaking up about Sasuke's attack Naruto, the strange markings that had covered him, and the weird chakra he had given off. Choji and surprisingly Ino quickly backed his word, and a stony expression covered Iruka's face while a feral growl escaped from Hana's throat. The Uchiha himself scowled as he had made Sakura swear to keep her mouth shut but hadn't counted on Team 10 to back the blonde in any way, especially Ino. The two Chunin shared a look, and while Hana led them to a place they could get some food, Iruka himself vanished in a whirl of leaves, stating he would be reporting the matter to both Kakashi and the Hokage personally. Rather quickly they found themselves in a mess hall where several others were already gathered. Looking around they could see Hinata and the rest of Team 8, the boy Gaara from Suna along with his teammates, and the girl Fu from Taki with who they guessed were her teammates. Aside from them there was also a team from Kumo, and even one from IWA as well. All together that made 7 teams to have made it into the tower, and this was already the 4th day. As they entered, Naruto ignored the glares and weak killing intent coming from the IWA Nin and instead moved over to the table occupied by Team 8. 20 minutes later Kakashi entered the room, his book absent, and a hard look within his visible eye. The man didn't so much walk as he strode up to the table, giving Naruto and Sakura acknowledging nods before grabbing Sasuke none too gently by the shoulder and vanishing in a shunshin. When informed on the reasons behind his actions, the scowls that had crossed Kiba and Hinata's face had spoken more than enough, as did the loud buzzing emanating from Shino's direction. If they'd have known better they'd have cherished the moment, for they had no idea of the trouble that was to come. Within the confines of her lab, Washu sat back with a frown, massaging the bridge of her nose due to the migraine she had been given. Contrary to the popular belief in her circle of friends, she hated working at late hours of the night, which was exactly what she had been forced to do. The news that Sito had brought to her attention had been the push needed to get her to do so. By her estimates it was nearing 2 o'clock in the morning, meaning she'd been working for nearly 5 hours after she initially had been preparing for bed. "I suppose I have to make exceptions sometimes," mused the genius. In truth, if there was ever any time to make exceptions to her work rules, this was it. She knew all about the people of Melmoss, and as such learning the Niju had gotten a vision of future events was not surprising for her. When Sito had gone to see the Hokage, they had put that together with the information Jiraiya had gotten a hold of about a group of Nukenin that were supposedly hunting the Bijou. However, the fact that Naruto held such an important role in the events of this planet was the real driving force. She hadn't been sure at first, and as such had called up some of the power that she kept locked away, allowing her to connect with the planet spiritually. Immediately she had been greeted to the sight of a young woman that had apparently been waiting on her by the name of Kyra, who had been able to give her a more complete description of what was going on. The end result of that conversation was now sitting in front of her. She had in the last few hours made several major modifications to the power core that held the consciousness of the Kyuubi. Not only had she completely stabilized it, but she had tweaked it so that it could now be considered a whole being. A soft beeping nose brought her out of her musings, causing her to look up and see that the percentage bar that had been taking up her screen was completely filled, meaning the task was now done. Standing from her seat, she made her way to a metal workbench within the center of which was a circle-like protrusion with finger grooves within it. Turning it clockwise until it stopped, she took a step back as steam came shooting out as the circle rose, showing it was in truth a cap connected to a large glass container within the center of which was a large glowing red ball of energy. Checking the stabilization levels, she was pleased to find that everything had worked out as she had hoped, and pushing down on the top found it easily sliding back and concealing itself within the workbench. Turning away, she stretched herself out with a yawn as she exited the confines of her lab, everything powering off as soon as she had. Konoha in the early morning was a beautiful sight. Even without the full hustle and bustle due to the early hour, it was something that never failed to instill a sense of peacefulness within the mind of the Sandaime Hokage and allowed him time to think and mentally prepare himself for the day ahead as he looked out over the village from his office window. Finally, however, he turned away from the sight and moved over to his seat behind his desk. His personal A and BU guard, well used to his routine, each took a separate position through the room and faded into the background. 7:30 on the dot, the office doors opened and his day officially began as his secretary allowed in the day's first guests, these being the women known as Sito and the woman known as Washu along with Kakashi. His office window opened and Jiraiya strolled in from the balcony, tucking his own pipe away as he entered. Once all the doors closed, the Sandaime placed his hand on a concealed sealing array on his desk, which quickly activated the privacy seals lining the walls, ceiling, and floor of the room. "Kakashi, how are the exams progressing?" questioned the Sandaime. "As of right now, we are entering day 3 of the second exam. As it stands now, so far only 4 teams have passed: teams 7, 8, 10 and a team from Suna. Both Asuma's and my own team arrived together last night. I was alerted to this by Yumino Iruka, who came and found me in the lounge and explained to me that Sasuke had tried to assault Naruto, and according to the report from Team 10 had been covered by strange markings with strange chakra. I took Sasuke to an isolated portion of the tower where I found he'd been branded with a curse seal, which I used the Fujihoin to seal away," reported Kakashi. "Keep me informed of any problems with the Uchiha. If necessary, Jiraiya can put a stronger seal on him," stated the Sandaime, getting a nod from the masked Jounin. "Lady Washu, I hope our request did not inconvenience you," stated the Sandaime as he turned to the short red-headed woman. "Not much. However, I'd like to say for the record that if not for the current situation, I wouldn't have done it at all." As she said this, Washu picked up a metal case from off the floor beside her and handed it to Kakashi. The Sandaime only nodded his understanding. In truth, this was the last thing that he wanted to do. However, it was also Naruto's best chance for survival, which was the most important thing as far as he was concerned. "Kakashi, how has he been doing?" questioned Hiruzen. "Truthfully, we've hit a wall," stated Kakashi with a sigh. "In the beginning it looked like the extraction had brought nothing but benefits. However, that's been proven to be an incorrect assessment, as I've discovered a major problem. I've led him to believe that his control was shot to hell due to the extraction, and as such he would have to bring it back up. In truth, I had a medic covertly do a scan of his chakra, and they discovered that there is an imbalance in his chakra with a ratio 65 to 35, with his physical chakra as the dominant one. He can still use ninjutsu, just not to the level that he once could. Whereas before he could make over 100 shadow clones, now he can only make 20. The medics theorized that this imbalance was due to the fact that Kyuubi's chakra was more potent than his own and had acted to not only mask the deficiency but ignore it altogether," stated Kakashi. The 2 other shinobi in the room grimaced as they realized exactly what that meant. It actually explained quite a bit in regards to the boy's chakra control issues, as it only made sense that with such an imbalance in his energy he would have trouble using it. What all higher-level shinobi realized was that chakra in its purest form was all about balance. Sure, there were arts that focused on one form or another, but at the end of the day it was all about balance and manipulation, and chakra control exercises helped with getting a shinobi to a level where they could truly say that they had mastered their chakra. "I might know someone who could fix that," stated Jiraiya, causing the other 2 shinobi to focus on him. "I'll take the Gaki with me for the month leading up to the exam and handle his training from there. Kakashi, you just focus on the other 2 until we get back," stated Jiraiya, his serious tone telling everyone that the matter was not up for discussion. "Would this person happen to be someone I know?" questioned the legendary Sandaime Hokage, causing the Gamma Sennin to sigh. "Yeah, I just hope they don't kill me when they see me." Within the central tower located within the Forest of Death, Naruto found himself rather rudely jarred awake from a dream featuring himself swimming within a ramen pool. Looking up, he found himself catching sight of his white-haired sensei staring down at him with a serious eye. Blinking as he reached up to rub the sleep from his eyes, the blonde sat up slowly and moved to place his feet to the floor. "What time is it?" questioned the blonde with a frown. 0800. The answer was short and precise, and it caused the blonde to groan. He wasn't a morning person and probably never would be. "So what's up, sensei?" questioned the boy, figuring the quicker they got whatever it is out the way, the quicker he could go back to sleep. "Some news has recently come in, and while it is currently beyond your clearance level to know, there is concern for your safety from Hokage-sama. Not only him, but Sito-sama and your grandparents have also expressed their concern regarding the situation as well. Because of this, for the time being, Lady Washu is giving you this." With that said, the cycloptic Jounin removed a scroll from his vest pocket, and after unrolling it, and the customary plume of smoke that came from unsealing objects, held a large steel briefcase within his hand. Taking the presented case into his own hands, Naruto blinked tiredly as he eyed both the case and then his sensei, only to find the man was no longer there, before sighing placing the thing down on the bed. Before he could speak, a strange beeping noise caught his attention, and he turned to find that the top of the case had split in half, a vertical line cutting through its center with each half sliding back until the inner edge of each half rested on what used to be the edge. Peering inside, he found himself staring at a small screen which soon rose out and turned so that it was sitting just before his face before it flickered on to show a view of Washu sitting upon her chair within her lab looking ahead and into the camera intently. "Good morning, Naruto-dano, I hope you are doing well. Now then, there are a few things we need to speak about concerning this care package I've sent to you. Within this case is the completed core that holds the Kyuubi's chakra and sentience. Before anything else, you should know that this will not be the same as the last time the two of you were bonded. Whereas before you acted as a jailer, in this instance you should think of it as a partnership. The core, once you grab hold of it, will be absorbed into your body at the same time, creating a link or a bond between the two of you, with your DNA acting as the key. However, as your body never held the full power of the Kyuubi, it may take some time for you to adjust to it. Other than that, it will be just as things were before, with the exception that you can remove and reinsert the core from yourself at will," explained what he now knew to be a recording of a genius. In truth, he didn't know how to feel about this new information. While he had felt relieved after his separation from the Kyuubi, he had never told anyone just how vulnerable he had come to feel. As far as he could remember, he'd always had more energy than everyone else around him, and could even run members of the ANBU into the ground. After the removal, he'd found his stamina had taken a huge plunge. Sure, chakra-wise he still had around 4 times as much as Kakashi, but he just hadn't felt the same. At the same time, he had realized exactly how much he had been taking what he had assumed to be natural gifts for granted. He had never had to put much thought into the things he did in battle, as he had known that if all else failed in a battle of attrition, he would win every time, and with the absurd amount of shadow clones he could create, he could overwhelm anyone. The past month he had learned several things about himself that he had not known beforehand. Being forced to go back to the basics, as it were, had gotten him to reevaluate himself and go back to what he had done before Kage Bunshin. No longer did he rely on numbers to overwhelm his opponents. Instead, he opted to hit his opponents fast and hard, just like he used to. After all, as far as brute strength and battle instinct went, he'd always been ahead of his peers. One solid blow from him was enough to lay some people out, and while he hadn't always had the technical skill everyone else had, he was crafty enough to figure out a way to land that blow that would end it. Training with Kakashi had only made him more dangerous, as in less than half a year, through sheer hard work and stubbornness, he'd learned a taijutsu style and earned that technical skill that had gotten him to the point that he could now beat Sasuke in pure taijutsu. Still, he would be lying if he said he didn't miss the way he used to be. After learning the truth of that night nearly 13 years ago, as he had stood in front of the cage that held the fox, he had known in that instant that one day his goal of surpassing every Kage before him would come to fruition. When it came to sheer power, he had already had that. If he had ever learned to control the power that had laid dormant, he would have probably been unstoppable. However, despite that he was prideful, he disliked the idea of relying on anyone or anything, and being powerful just due to the Kyuubi didn't sit right with him. However, now that he knew what it was like to be a regular human, he'd admit, if only to himself, he'd rather have his old existence back. Whatever the case, he'd put those thoughts aside as the recording was still going. The reason for this is that I'm working on something else at the moment, and the core will act as the main power source. This means that only you will be able to use what I'm making. However, that's all I'm saying about that, since I want the rest to be a surprise. Anyway, good luck with the rest of the exam. Oh, I also included a little something for you to pass the time with, so have fun. With that, the message ended and the screen went dark. Sighing at the sight, he looked down and removed a small handheld device from inside the briefcase. He'd seen one before, as Mihoshi actually kept one and spent a lot of her time glued to the screen, moving her fingers constantly. As he sat it down, he heard a hiss and watched as the interior of the briefcase lifted with white smoke coming from its depths as it rose to show a red orb. For several minutes he simply sat there staring at the orb, as he knew that his next move would undoubtedly determine his future, and he felt as if he was now weighing his life on a scale and determining which option held the greater reward. In the beginning he hadn't had a choice in becoming the vessel of the Kyuubi, and for all his life he had suffered the consequences of that action. The villagers had basically isolated and neglected him with but a few exceptions. Despite the sheer loneliness that had come to him as a result, it had made him strong. Whereas most kids faltered once problems came at them, he had grown up with adversity, and it had made him a survivor. At the same time, he could see what the reverse could have been in Konohamaru. When he had first met the grandson of the Sandaime and gotten to know and speak with him, he had seen just what kind of shadow being known as the son of the Yondaime could have forced him under. The villagers simply saw him as a title, not even a real person in his own right, and so Naruto had took the boy under his wing to help to bring out his true character. He didn't like to admit it, but he knew that could have easily been him, and just imagining himself as one of those spoiled rich kids who thought everything should just be handed to them like Konohamaru had been or like Sasuke still was sickened him. So yes, being a container had forced him into living through some hard times, but there were hidden bonuses as well. Despite his malnourishment as a chibi, he had never actually been sick a day in his life. He had never gotten too cold or too hot. On the other hand, he had grown up wishing that he could be normal, just like everyone else, without even truly understanding what had set him apart from everyone else. Now he was, and what did he really have to show for it? He didn't feel any different than he did before, except for the major hit he'd taken in the stamina and energy department. However, ever since he and the fox had separated, people had slowly began to look at him as Naruto, and not as some shadow of the fox, as if they truly wanted to see who he was. The problem was, however, that he didn't even really know who he was. He had never really had a strong sense of self, and growing up he had tried to avoid thinking because he eventually had to ask that very question. Still, even though he had yet to answer that question, what with all the revelations that had popped up about himself over the last little stretch of time, all the new titles that had been added to the plate, son of the Yondaime, grandson of the Nidaime, prince of Jiraiya, even though none of those titles answered the question of who he was, he knew what he wasn't, and normal wasn't it. If someone would have asked him earlier if he was separated from the Kyuubi what he would do, taking the fox back and would not have been the answer. Yet that is exactly what he was doing. Unlike before, it was not a burden that was thrust upon him, but something that he himself chose to take on. He knew this to be true even as he removed the large sphere of energy from the case and held it in hand. For a moment he just eyed the sphere before suddenly it dissolved into pure energy and shot into his hand. For several seconds he simply blinked before a pain unlike any other he had ever experienced racked his entire body. It was as if liquid fire was racing through his very veins, replacing his blood, and if that wasn't bad enough, a new pain suddenly hit him as his body fell to the floor, as chakra surged out of his body, becoming a fiery aura that surrounded his form before he finally screamed out his agony and passed out. Elsewhere within the village, Tennyo walked down the street with a small smile on her face. Over the time they had been in the village, she had made it something of a routine for her to walk through the village daily. Usually she wound up at the academy to converse with Iruka, who Naruto had introduced her to a while back, and she could see that the two were actually quite close whenever they were together. At the moment she was outside of her usual route, and had been joined by her Aunt Minaho as they made their way to Ichiraku's ramen stand along with Kakashi, who was acting as their escort after having ran into them several minutes prior. In an effort to better blend in, Minaho had changed from her Jurian robes and instead wore a green dress which stopped at her shins with a pair of black sandals that went up to just past her ankles, while beneath the dress was a white sleeveless and collarless blouse. Thankfully her sister hadn't changed much size-wise, otherwise raiding her clothes would have been a major letdown. Tennyo was also wearing one of her late sister's outfits, only opting for a very light blue kimono decorated with butterflies and tied with a purple obi. As they entered through the flaps of the stand, Minaho took just a moment to breathe in the scent of the noodles, as she had her own healthy love of the dish, though nothing like her sister's near obsession. "Welcome to Ichiraku's," greeted Ayam with a smile which Kakashi knew was not forced, as she actually was a morning person. "Hey Ayam, is your father in yet?" asked the silver-haired jounin, already knowing the answer but asking anyway. "Sure, let me get him," said Ayam, disappearing into the back only to reappear several minutes later with Tucci. "Kakashi, a little early for you to be out and about, isn't it?" questioned Tucci as he made his appearance. Actually, I was on my way back from checking in with the kids when I ran into these two and decided I could play escort for a bit when I find out they were heading here," said Kakashi. Tucci almost snorted but managed to withhold the action at the last instant. Having known the Jounin for as long as he had, he knew that he didn't just run into them, and instead had likely scouted them out and waited for an opportunity to make his entrance. Turning to the two women, he had to admit that the brats certainly had good taste just from their physical aspects alone. "So how can I help you ladies?" questioned Tucci. "Well, Tucci-san, I actually wanted to thank you for looking after Naruto-kun all this time," said Minaho. "Don't worry about that, the Gaki's family. I looked out for him just like I know his parents would have looked out for Iam if anything happened to me," said Tucci. "Despite this, I felt that it was only right that we return the favor." Just as she said this, Minaho handed Iam a booklet from the bag she'd been carrying. The days had passed quickly, and all too soon the fifth and final day had passed, bringing with it the end of the second exam. At this moment, all those who had passed stood within a large room with several upper-level shinobi standing above them on platforms, including the proctors of the first two exams and the Hokage himself. As he looked around, the Hokage ran critical eyes on the group of genin that had made it thus far. 5 teams from Konoha, 4 of which were taking the exams for the first time, and of those 4, 3 of those teams comprised of rookies. To say he was pleased was actually quite an understatement. Of the other teams in attendance, there was 1 from Suna, 1 from Taki, and even 1 from AIM. This meant there was now a grand total of 24 genin in attendance, something which caused Anko to grit her teeth in aggravation, having wanted to cut the numbers down to the single digits. "Well, I guess I have to say congratulations to you brats, since somehow all of you managed to get here. You passed," stated Anko. As Anko stepped back and the Sandaime stepped forward to deliver his speech, Naruto found himself tuning it out. Now, this was in no way due to being disinterested in what the man had to say, but more that he'd heard it several times before from the man. The Chunin exams weren't just about getting a promotion, but acted as a substitution for war amongst the various villages, blah blah blah. Sure, it was important to know from a factual standpoint, but once again, heard it once, heard it a million times. Instead, he spent the time during the old man's speech doing something he hadn't done in months, planning a prank. Of course, most people would wonder why, in the middle of an exam as important as what this one was, would he be planning something as juvenile as a prank? The answer to that was quite simple. As far as he was concerned, a challenge had been issued. Sure, he was in the forest tower and hadn't witnessed it himself, but Kakashi, during one of his visits to check up on him, had informed him of the offense. And as a great man once said, to be the man, you've got to beat the man. His thoughts, however, were brought back to his surroundings as the speech ended, signaled by the old man stepping back as a new person took his place. The man stood at about 5 feet 7 inches and wore the garb of a Konoha shinobi of Chunin rank or higher. Hide on his forehead stitched into a bandana, and had short dark brown hair and markings beneath his eyes suggesting a lack of sleep. However, it was the chronic coughing that he was doing that let everyone know that he was actually ill. "My name is Gecko Hate, I am the proctor for the 3rd exam," stated the man before coughing harshly into his hand several times before he was able to continue. "However, before we can get into that, I first must inform all of you that prior to the 3rd exam we will be undergoing a preliminary exam so that you can qualify," stated the Jounin. "What, why?" questioned more than a few of the assembled genin. "Due to the importance of several of the individuals that will be in attendance for the 3rd exam, it is placed under a time constraint. This in turn means that there is a select number of genin that can participate. As for why this is the case this year, perhaps because the first 2 exams may have been too easy this time around," said Hate, causing several of them to gape. "Regardless of any reason, from this point forward the exam will be a solo effort, as it is quite possible that some of you are here due solely to your teammates carrying you through it. As such, the preliminaries will determine just who among you deserves to continue forward. If there is anyone among you who would like to bow out, now is the time," stated Hate. For several long moments all was silent until a pair of hands rose amongst the competing genin. Taking a moment to look them over, Naruto found that one was a boy from Taki who wore black pants and a gray shirt over which was a dark blue jacket. He had spiky brown hair and was currently favoring his left arm, which explained why he had decided to opt out at this point. The other was an older genin he recognized as Yakushi Kabuto, However, unlike the Taki genin, he didn't have a single injury showing why he was opting out. If he actually knew about the guy from more than just one meeting, he might have said something, but as he didn't, he simply didn't care and let the matter drop. However, while Naruto may have been content to let the matter drop, a pair of eyes narrowed on the boy as he moved to leave the room. Didn't that kid drop out at this same point last time? Questioned Anko quietly, remembering as it was her first time as a proctor. Raising his eyebrow at the question, the scar-faced interrogator opened up a dossier with the boy's picture on it. Quickly scanning it, he found something highly irregular in that not only was this his 7th time taking the exam, he had quit at the same point 6 times prior. Narrowing his eyes in anger, Ibiki spoke quietly into a headpiece he was wearing before hearing a confirmation of his order replied through the opposite end before he turned his attention back to the center of the room. Now then, as there are now 23 of you left, let it be known that whoever is not selected will receive an automatic entrance into the 3rd exam. Just after he said this, a large section of the wall slid away to reveal a large screen to the eyes of the gathered genin. As it became active, the picture was jumbled as it cycled for nearly a minute before it stopped displaying a pair of names, Inuzuka Kiba vs Yudachi. As the 2 names were displayed, everyone but those named moved up to the catwalks above to observe the match. For his part, Kiba smirked at having been given the first match, even as he eyed his opponent. Looking at him, one could see that Yudachi was about 15 and, like Kiba himself, had short brown hair, though he stood at perhaps 5 feet 7 inches, giving him almost a foot of height on Kiba, who was only 4 feet 9 inches. Despite the obvious difference in size, Kiba wasn't the least bit intimidated and proved it, for as soon as the proctor gave the signal to start, the Inuzuka had closed the distance between himself and the older genin so quickly the aim nin could only look on in shock as Kiba slammed him with a knee to the sternum that hit with such force he was sent skidding back nearly 3 feet. Not even giving him a chance to recover, the Inuzuka bounded after him, and before his opponent could even look up from his recovery attempt, the Inuzuka had pounced, forcing him to the ground with his right hand reared back, his hands now clawed and ready to bring it down, only for the other team to quickly scream out his surrender. As the sound registered, Kiba blinked in shock before growling low in his throat in aggravation. "That's it, 2 moves in and he quits. The warm-ups me and Naruto had in the academy lasted longer," raged the Inuzuka internally, giving the older teen a look of disgust before stalking off. Kiba, however, wasn't the only one disappointed in the length of time that had taken. In fact, if looks could kill, the aim nin wouldn't even be a pile of ash at that point, as every single guy in the room was glaring at him. It was only when he started spitting up blood that the glaring ceased in exchange for looks of confusion. Frowning himself, Hate quickly called for the medics, who after several minutes of work loaded the teen onto a stretcher and carried him away. Once the area was clear of medical personnel, Hate quickly restarted the screen, watching as the names cycled before stopping on the names of 2 more genin. Rock Lee vs Hoki. YOSH. Came the excited cry from Rock Lee as his name appeared on the board, causing him to leap over the rail to the ground in his excitement. His opponent Hoki, however, took a bit longer to get down, preferring to take the stairs. Physically speaking, Hoki seemed like he would have the advantage over the green beast, appearing to be about 16 or 17 years old, and had to stand at least 5 feet 6 inches, while Lee himself was only 5 feet 2 inches. Hoki wore a gray shirt beneath a dark blue trench coat and black pants, with his taki haidite secured around his forehead. As they took their positions, Hate eyed them both, and seeing that both genin were ready, started the match. Immediately the 2 were in motion, with Hoki leaping back and flinging a kuni at Lee, only for the green beast to rush him at the same moment, dodging around the kunai easily. Quickly closing the distance between them, Lee leapt forward through the air, opening up with his signature Konoha Senpu. And while Hoki was able to duck out of the way of the high kick, it left him open for the low kick that followed, slamming into his chest and throwing him back. Recovering quickly, the taki nin used the momentum of the kick to put some distance between them, running through a short chain of seals before expelling a stream of water from his mouth. Lee, however, had not remained idle and had quickly moved to close the distance. Seeing the water coming, the green beast dropped into a slide, taking him under the powerful spray and directly to his opponent, who could only look on wide-eyed as the younger teen connected with a rising kick to his chin that sent him airborne. Flipping himself backwards with the momentum of the kick, Hoki reached into his coat and withdrew a pair of tonfa from behind his back. Unfortunately for him, he underestimated his momentum, and wasn't minding his surroundings as he slammed back first into the statue in the center of the room, hitting with such force his entire body straightened, resulting in the back of his head slamming into the stone before he fell to the ground. After several moments of spying the boy's unmoving form, Hate walked over to him and after checking him over once again called in the medics before moving away. Winner by knockout Rock Lee, but I didn't even kick him that hard. Thought Lee, crocodile tears trailing down his face as he made his way back up to the catwalk. After Hoki was collected by the medics, everyone turned once more to see the screen had started up once more. As it flew through the names, all of the genin watched it either in anticipation or anxiousness, but nevertheless all eyes were on the screen until finally it stopped, revealing the next pair of names. Elsewhere, the members of Clan Masaki had been gathered within a large sitting room within the main house on the Senju clan estate. The Senju estates resembled the Huga estate in that its design was very traditional, complete with sliding shoji doors which made them feel very much at home, as it was much like the house in which they lived on Earth. Joining them was Jiraiya, who had been introduced to them by Sito not much earlier. They had all just enjoyed a nice lunch prepared by Sasami, Noik, and Kiriko, much to the group's satisfaction, though Jiraiya and Sito had arrived in the midst of its preparation, so it had been no problem to prepare just a bit extra to serve him. That was without doubt one of the best meals that I have had in years. You ladies have a real talent, said Jiraiya, causing all three to blush slightly at the praise. Now then, Jiraiya-san, if you would please explain the purpose of your visit, said Sito, causing a serious expression to cover the face of the Toad Sage. Very well. I'll make this short and to the point. The reason for my visit is to inform you that for the time leading up to the exams I will be taking Naruto with me to a place where he can get some more intense training. Why can you not do this training here? Questioned Aika with a frown. Truthfully, because I'm not going to be the one in charge of his training for the most part. After speaking with Kakashi, it was determined that he needs a certain kind of training which I don't specialize in. Furthermore, there is only one person who can actually teach him all that he needs to know, and while Kakashi has a decent grasp of the basics, it is not enough, said Jiraiya. When would you be trying to leave? Questioned Eri. There is a preliminary round being held at this moment to determine who will participate in the main exam. I will be taking him immediately afterwards, stated Jiraiya. Understandable, you wish to maximize training time. However, I feel that is not all concerning this meeting, stated Sito. Correct, there is one last secret concerning Naruto that he must be made aware of concerning his heritage, a secret that not even the council or our daimyo is aware of, and there is only one person who can inform him, explained Jiraiya. If that is the case, then it is only right that a few members of his family accompany him. I believe Yosho, Eri and Sasami would suffice in this instance, stated Sito. I don't know about that, we won't be using wagons or anything of the sort, stated Jiraiya with a frown. If it's a question of an ability to keep up, then trust me, they will be capable, stated Sito. Naruto sighed as the last of the competitors were taken away. The last few matches had all been short, and for the most part uninteresting. A Suna nin by the name of Kankuro had been put up against an older leaf nin named Tsurugi Misumi, who had demonstrated an ability to stretch his limbs to great proportions. He had wrapped himself around his opponent only for his opponent to be revealed as a puppet, while the real Kankuro had been wrapped up in bandages and had waited to reveal himself until he had a sure win by having the puppet literally squeeze the life out of him. Following this, Sasuke had been pit against a Taki nin who had proven himself to be far too weak to have been put against the Uchiha heir. Following this, the Kunoichi from Suna, Temari, had been pit against Ino, with the latter losing rather easily to the more experienced Kunoichi. Following this, another leaf nin named Huga Niji had been put up against a genin from AIM named Ryuji, only to put him down with one strike. As the next names came up, Naruto perked up slightly at seeing one of the people he was more interested in seeing in action had been selected. Samidare vs. Gaara. As the two of them made their way down, Naruto took the time to look over Samidare. He had spiky brown hair with a ponytail and short spiky bangs hanging over his aim Ishu Haidite. He wore what looked to be a dark blue and gray bodysuit with a green scarf wrapped around his neck and a light gray jacket. He held himself with a sort of calm confidence that had been missing in the other two AIM nin, despite the fact he was clearly the youngest of the bunch. As the two of them faced off, Hade gave both teens a once-over before declaring a start to the match and moving away. For several moments both were still as they eyed each other, each looking for the other to make the first move. Finally the stare down was broken as Samidare rushed forward, closing the short distance between them and letting loose a punch at the redhead's jaw, only for it to be stopped dead as a wall of coarse brown material halted the fist in its tracks. Wide-eyed in surprise he leapt back, flinging a pair of kunai to cover his retreat, only for the same substance to rise up and force them to a halt before dropping them to the floor. Narrowing his eyes, he removed a scroll from his jacket, summoning a pair of umbrellas from within before tossing the scroll aside. Tossing the umbrellas up into the air, those looking on could only watch in surprise as a literal rain of samban came pouring down straight at the Sunanin. His arms crossed over his chest, he didn't even bat an eye as his gourd burst apart, shielding him from the bombardment of projectiles. Wide-eyed Samidare could only look on in shock as the shield, which he could now tell was made of sand of all things, allowed the projectiles to fall to the floor, with the dull thump of metal striking the ground being the only sound heard. "Is that it?" questioned Gaara, his voice a dull monotone to put even the Aburaim clan to shame, while the sand came up to tower around him in the shape of a wave, boring. In an instant the wave of sand had fallen upon the Aim-nin, with a tendril wrapping around his right ankle, pulling him down as he tried to leap away. As that one tendril pulled him down, the rest cascaded quickly, surrounding the Aim-nin and lifting him up into the air while leaving only his head free. Glaring up at his foe, Gaara raised but a single hand out towards him before clenching it into a fist. Instantly the sand reacted, and the sickening sound of the human body imploding could be heard, along with a short wail of anguish, as a shower of blood rained down upon the floor before the sand withdrew, allowing the mangled corpse to land on the ground. In the stand, several of the genin shivered at the brutal ending of the match. Most had never seen anything that brutal in their lives, and while others weren't as bad, they were still affected, as could be seen by the widening of eyes or the sweat that had begun to build upon their faces. Among the genin there were only 4 that were not affected in such a way. 2 of them were Temari and Kankuro, who had become used to the sight even if they didn't necessarily like it. The other 2, however, were Fu and Naruto, both of whom had their eyes narrowed upon the redhead as they went over what they had seen. The fact that he could use sand as both a defensive tool and an offensive weapon was a surprise, simply due to the fact that such a thing was unheard of. The fact that he was capable of doing so much without even moving from his position, or even uncrossing his arms, showed that he would make a tough opponent. All of their thoughts, however, were put to a halt as the next names lit up the board. Akato Yoroi vs Uzumaki Naruto. After they made their way down, Naruto took the time to look over his opponent. Unfortunately, much like his teammate, you couldn't really see much as he was covered head to toe, including a mask and bandana type hidite, with a pair of dark lens glasses hiding his eyes from view. What he could see, however, was that he stood at about 5 feet 9 inches, and from what he could see of his build, had to weigh at least 140 to 145 pounds. Considering he himself was only bare 5 feet in height, but only 90 pounds, it meant that he was at a distinct disadvantage when it came to raw physical ability. That was fine, however, he could handle a bit of a handicap. Hajime. Immediately Yoroi was moving to cover the distance, with Naruto moving to meet him, ducking under the outstretched right hand of his opponent. The blonde got right inside his guard before slamming his fist directly into the older teen's midsection, folding him over. Without even the slightest bit of hesitation, he unleashed an uppercut with his right that slammed directly into the underside of his opponent's jaw, straightening him out, and in the next instant had slammed the sole of his foot right into his sternum, sending him back at least 2 feet before the older nin managed to recover. "So the rumors about your strength are true. This will be fun," said the older genin. In an instant he was dashing back at the blonde, only this time Naruto leapt back, creating a trio of shadow clones while still in the air. Without even a single verbal command, the clones rushed the older nin as soon as their feet touched the ground. Scoffing as they came, Yoro's hands blazed blue as he grabbed 2 of the clones by the neck and slammed them into the ground, causing them to disperse in twin plumes of smoke. That, however, still left clone number 3, who chose just that moment to come down with an axe kick, only for the leg to be caught and held for a few seconds before it dispersed as well. Standing to his feet, Yoro made a show of dusting off his hands before once again launching himself at the blonde, only this burst of speed seemed to be twice as fast, causing the blonde's eyes to widen. Moving on instinct, the blonde ducked under the right hook, wrapped both arms around his opponent's midsection, and surprised everyone, including his opponent, by actually lifting him into the air before slamming him back first onto the ground, landing on his own knees just to add more power before popping right back up. "Oh, spine buster!" exclaimed Choji with a grimace. "That's it, bring out the stretcher, he's done!" exclaimed Kiba, a wolfish grin on his face. "With his body type you forget just how strong he is until he does something like that," said Choji, shaking his head. "Just what the hell was that?" questioned Sasuke, though the question was on the mind of just about everyone, including the jounin. "It's called the Spine Buster, and is one of a group of grappling techniques that Naruto has created over the years. As for why it has its name, it is quite simple, as the attack targets the opponent's spine. I've only rarely seen anyone get up from something like that," said Shikamaru, surprising everyone who knew him with the serious expression on his face. "Why hasn't he ever used it before then?" questioned Ino. "He has, you've just never been to the underground," said Kiba. "And how do you know of such a place?" demanded Kurenai, glaring at the Inuzuka. "What are you guys talking about?" questioned Sasuke. "The underground. It's a pit where illegal fights happen. It's constantly moving though, so no one's been able to shut it down since it started up," explained Asuma. "And Naruto fought there?" questioned Sakura. "No, he didn't fight there," said Shikamaru, causing her as well as a few others to sigh. "He ruled there for the last 2 years," finished Shikamaru. Before anyone else could comment on that subject, however, they all focused back down on the floor, where even Naruto had stopped his walk towards the steps to turn back and watch as Yoro managed to climb back to his feet. Eyes wide and surprised at the sight, the blonde blinked before a scowl covered his features as the older Nin turned to face him. "You're going to have to do better than that, punk," stated Yoroi. "How the hell are you back up? I've hospitalized people with that move," said the blonde. "That's my secret. More importantly, what will you do now? You've got to be running on empty chakra-wise. After all, the shadow clone technique is quite the chakra-expensive technique. I know jounin that can only barely make 5, you've already made 3. Not to mention you've got to be feeling a little worse for wear now after that move you just pulled. But me, I have more than enough to keep going," stated Yoroi, a dark tone entering his voice. "Why, because you absorbed a little of my chakra?" questioned the blonde, giving everyone pause, including his opponent. "You're right, of course. Kage Bunshin is a chakra-heavy technique, but it has some benefits. For instance, I know my clones weren't dispersed due to damage inflicted, but because the chakra that made them up was disrupted. Also, the chakra that made them up never returned to me. I know that because I didn't receive any memories upon their dispersal. As for me being near empty, that pitiful amount is just a drop in the bucket," said Naruto with a smirk. "Bullshit, kid. I've just taken more chakra from you than I have jounin. Face it, you're done, and now you're dead," said Yoroi. Sighing at that, the blonde shook his head before squaring himself up once more. However, this time he stood straight up with his feet shoulders width apart, as he brought his hands together, his left hand grasping onto his right wrist as he extended his arms out towards his opponent. As he took the stance, the Sandaime Hokage watched in shock as he did this and gripped the rails before him tightly as the blonde pointed his index finger out towards his opponent, while all the rest of his fingers bar his thumb were tucked in. In the next instant, the blonde's chakra flared to life so much that it was clearly visible as a bright blue dome that surrounded the blonde, forcing many eyes to widen in shock at the sheer amount of chakra that he possessed. Slowly the dome of power was sucked in, leaving only his brightly glowing index finger to be seen to speak of the amount of power he was putting out. "Ray gone!" With that exclamation, a bright beam of energy about as thick as both his arms when put together was shot from his finger, with Yoro only just barely getting his hands up in time to block. Despite this, however, the beam still hit him with such force it actually slammed him into a wall and made a crater with his body while still digging into him. Finally, the beam cut off, leaving a panting Naruto while showing a sizzling Yoroi, who began screaming and thrashing almost as soon as the beam let up. He didn't waste a moment calling for the medics and by default naming Naruto the winner. Naruto, however, wasn't really paying attention. Instead, he was doing his best to massage his finger to get it to stop throbbing. Finally, he felt the pain cease and he made his way slowly up the stairs and to his team before he sat down with his back against the wall. Before anyone could speak up to him, however, the board once more began churning through names, forcing all to give it its due attention. Huga Hinata vs. Harino Sakura. As the two girls made their way down, Hinata was taking the time to mentally prepare herself for the fight. During the time she had been a genin, Kurenai had given her a lot of advice, but the best she'd gotten had come from Kiba of all people. He had told her that if she was uncomfortable, then she should be someone else, create a persona that was not only fine with what she did but would flourish doing it. That is exactly what she had set out to do. She had taken all the traits she wished she had and placed them within a persona that she stepped in when it came time to missions. Now, as she faced off against her opponent, this was who Sakura was looking upon, not on the shy and meek girl that everyone usually saw, but someone who was calm and confident, who was looking forward to the challenge. Hajime. At his words, Sakura rushed forward, throwing a powerful right hook only for Hinata to dart out of the way. Coming to a stop at her side, Hinata turned and looked at her incredulously. There was absolutely no way that Sakura had just thrown such a civilian-level punch at her. It had to have been a trap. As Sakura turned and raced towards her again, she ran through a quick chain of seals, producing a pair of clones as all three ran down the girl, each throwing the same overhead right punch at her. Guessing that it really hadn't been a trap, Hinata ignored both of the Sakuras coming up on her sides and instead focused on the one coming up from the middle, knocking her fist wide before poking at each of her shoulders with a pair of finger jabs. Immediately both of the Pinkette's arms dropped, but Hinata wasn't through and instead with a blazing Byakugan proceeded to lay into the pink-haired girl, her arms mere blurs while Sakura's body rocked with each strike that the girl delivered on her, until finally Hinata stopped and Sakura dropped to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. Panting slightly from the speed she had moved at, Hinata felt the tension she hadn't even known she was carrying melt off of her as she stepped away and was declared the winner. Of course, she had always held a bit of resentment for the pink-haired girl. Unfortunately, her own personality had not let her express that, but she had always resented Sakura for having Naruto's attention. She hadn't realized just what she had having Naruto pay her such close attention. But it no longer mattered as he was hers now. Still, it felt good to give her a hit for everyone she had given Naruto in the past. As she made it back up to the rafters and was congratulated by her teammates, the facade fell and her normal shy countenance returned with a vengeance, as made obvious by the atomic blush that stained her cheeks before they all turned their attention back up to the board. Akimichi Choji vs. Aburame Shino. It took a bit of time before they were ready to start, as Asuma had to actually get Choji, and in the end, while he had managed to convince Choji, the fact that he had to bribe the portly genin to take part didn't sit right with him, especially with the looks he received from the other jounin for his trouble. Now as they stood before each other, hate spared each of them a look, finding Choji thinking more about food and Shino as stoic as an Aburame could be. Finally he started the match, and immediately Choji was in action, running through a few short seals before tucking his limbs into the sleeves of his shirt and shorts, his body growing until he became a large ball that shot straight at the Aburame air. Shino didn't even blink as the large mass of rolling flesh that was Choji slammed into him. Instead, his body burst apart into a large black shadow that swarmed all over him. Feeling what seemed like millions of things crawling all over him, Choji poured out even more power, his body launching itself at the nearest wall and slamming into it. And when that didn't make it stop, he did it again, bouncing from wall to wall, picking up speed each time until finally he landed with a crash on the floor, his body back to normal, and him clearly exhausted. At the same time, the shadow left Choji and literally flew to a darkened corner of the room, where Shino emerged, stepping out of the shadows as the dark mass split up and shot up each of his sleeves. "Winner Aburame Shino," said Hate after a moment. Quietly making his way back up to the rafters, Shino nodded his thanks to everyone who congratulated him before quietly returning to his place next to his sensei. Finally, everyone turned their attention back up to the board as once more it lit up, and those remaining watched eagerly to see who would be placed in the last match, and who would be lucky enough to avoid it altogether and go straight into the exams. Finally, the board stopped displaying a pair of names, causing both to begin moving to the ground, while Shikamaru exhaled a sigh of relief that he didn't have to do something so troublesome as fight a girl. Tenten vs. Fu. As they arrived on the ground before him, Hei took a moment to look over both girls, and finding that both appeared ready, began the match. Almost immediately Tenten was in motion, leaping back and putting a bit of space between them, making it so that she was not too close yet at the same time not too far from her opponent. Normally this would have been fine, but Fu was having none of it. In an instant she had closed that distance, and in the next Tenten could be seen flying across the room as Fu appeared in the place she'd last been standing. Recovering in mid-air, Tenten flipped herself so that she was right side up and in a single motion launched a trio of shuriken at the Takinin. Fu dodged easily, but Tenten didn't care, as that attack wasn't meant to hit but allow her time to land. Even as she slid to a stop, however, Tenten had to marvel at the other girl's speed. It was unreal. The only person she'd ever seen move faster had been Guy himself. However, her admiration was put on hold as she removed a pair of scrolls from her pouch and set them on the ground. She didn't really want to use this technique, but this girl was simply too fast for her to even think of not using it. Running through a quick chain of seals, she was suddenly enshrouded in smoke before two dragons made of smoke shot up into the air, circling each other before they were revealed to be Tenten's now unraveled scrolls. Appearing in the air in the middle of the rotating scrolls, she bit both of her thumbs before reaching out to each side of her, producing a sigh and a comma in each hand before letting them fly. What followed was a rain of metal as Tenten began to spin, sending down all manner of sharp and pointy objects down towards Fu, who did her best to dodge them all, yet Tenten still managed to follow her with the weapons until the rain of metal death abruptly stopped, showing that she'd ran out of weapons considering they were all currently littering the floor. Fu, however, gritted her teeth, seeing she'd managed to be backed into a corner, and Tenten, still in the air, smirked and pulled her hands back, revealing all the weapons to be tied to chakra strings connected to her fingers, causing them all to lift and hover in the air, pointed directly at the mint-haired kunoichi. Fu, however, didn't panic. Instead, she took a breath, and when she let it out, she screamed. This, however, was no ordinary scream let loose by fear. Instead, this was a high-pitched wail, canary cry, don, which not only knocked all the weapons and Tenten out of the air, but those more sensitive to the sound like Kiba and Naruto were also forced to their knees, holding their ears in pain, struggling to block the sound. Finally Fu stopped, and all was silent within the room, with the more observant people managing to see that some serious damage had been done to Tenten's collection of weapons as well. Tenten herself had been knocked unconscious. Whether it was from the sound, fall, or a combination of both was up in the air. Seeing this, Hate had no choice but to name the mint-haired kunoichi as the winner. Impressive. Naruto didn't even twitch at the deep voice that had penetrated through his thoughts. Over the last few days it was something he had gotten used to, though the first time he nearly jumped out of his pants due to the surprise. With the knowledge that he held about the truth of his parents' deaths and the reason for his life, he had found he couldn't hold a grudge with the fox, and the fox in return was grateful that the boy had let him go with no thought of abusing his power, and whose only reservation had been whether he'd live through the process. As such, the two had set into a partnership of sorts. They weren't friends or enemies, but they had a common one, that they both wanted dead badly. She is pretty fast, mused the blonde. She also has a pretty decent grasp of her abilities. Gaara too, returned the blonde evenly. His control isn't that good. Most of what happened with the sand was Shikaku's doing. The only reason he appears so strong is because that overgrown rat has a strong influence, said the fox. Naruto was broken from his conversation with the fox as he heard Hate call for everyone who won their matches to come to the ground. Once everyone was down, they were stood in a line as Anko went around with a box from which each person removed a piece of paper. Once everyone had a piece, Ibiki called for each person to read what was on the paper, starting from right to left. 3 said Shikamaru, 2 said Kiba, 8 said Hinata, 5 said Shino, 1 said Niji, 10 said Lee, 4 said Tamari, 6 said Kankuro, 11 said Gaara, 7 said Sasuke, 12 said Naruto, 9 Fu. Once Ibiki had everything written down, he eyed his notepad for a moment before nodding, passing it along to a pair of chunin who immediately got to work copying its contents. While they waited, Hate reminded the group that they would have a month to train for the 3rd exam due to all of the VIPs that would be attending, before motioning them to look at the chunin, who turned over a large board for them to see its contents. Huga Niji vs Inuzuka Kiba, Nara Shikamaru vs Tamari, Aburame Shino vs Kankuro, Uchiha Sasuke vs Huga Hinata, Rock Lee vs Fu, Gaara vs Uzumaki Naruto. Once everyone had ample time to look over the board and they had a short Q&A session, they were dismissed, and none of them could get out of there fast enough. Naruto knew he had his work cut out for him for the next month, but at the moment all he wanted was to take a shower, a nap, and go to Ichiraku's. Everything else could wait. Naruto sighed in relief as the door of his apartment closed behind him. Despite the access of the Senju compound being given to him, he had adamantly refused from moving from his apartment. It had been something that the members of the Masaki clan had not understood until the Sandaime had explained. It had been where his parents lived, and Azusa had declared the matter closed, and bought the entire building. Before he had left, he had given the blonde the deed and informed him that any renovations he wanted to do would be paid for. Naruto had sent a letter to Tazuna explaining the situation and had been pleased when he had replied that he'd send someone to take a look at the place. Despite whatever renovations would happen, however, Naruto wasn't going to do much to his apartment, maybe put down some new carpet and replace the floorboards in the kitchenette, but for the most part he wanted to keep the place exactly how it was. Shaking the thoughts from his mind, he wasted no time grabbing a towel from his closet and entering the bathroom, turning the shower on and allowing the water to heat up. Moving towards his bedroom, he made quick work of grabbing a change of clothes, and a few minutes later released a sigh of relaxation as the water beat on his tired and bruised muscles. As he stood under the spray of the water, he took a few moments to think of everything he'd seen during the preliminaries. So far from what he had seen, both Lee and Neji would give him a hard time. Rock Lee, from what he could see, was incredibly fast, and his taijutsu style was nothing to laugh at. Still, he and Lee had clashed plenty of times in the past, and had actually had quite the rivalry in the underground. That place had actually been a place where Lee had held the advantage, as chakra usage was illegal, but the Chunin tournament would be a place where he could really shine, as he could use his biggest advantage, his huge chakra pools. His teammate, on the other hand, while most likely not as fast, Neji had proven why people called him not only a prodigy among his clan but the strongest genin in the village. Not only was he pretty fast himself, but his taijutsu actually allowed for him to do even greater damage than usual, as he attacked his opponent's chakra network and internal organs directly. His Byakugan would also render most tricks that shinobi used useless, but he'd have to try and see the effects of the Kirigakyu no Jutsu. Neji was also someone that he had seen in the underground, and if there was one thing he'd learned about the Huga, it was that not only was he vicious, but he was always watching for even a hint of weakness, and would not hesitate to exploit it. The Sunakunoichi Temari he would also have to be wary of, as she had proven herself to be a pretty good wind user, but even more pressing, she hadn't shown much of what she was capable of against Ino. He'd like to believe that she would be taken out by Shikamaru, but knowing the Nara heir as well as he did, he figured he'd do just enough to win and secure his promotion, and then he would quit, allowing Temari to move on. Hinata as a Huga was also dangerous in a close-range fight. However, her opponent was Sasuke, and since Kakashi had already informed the team he would be taking control of Sasuke's training, at the behest of the council, he was sure the team would have something aside from his array of fire techniques by which to get past her. On the other hand, Hinata was a Huga, and with the rivalry that had developed between the Huga and Uchiha clan over the years, he wouldn't be surprised if Hayashi himself actually took an active interest in her training. The most dangerous of everyone participating, however, were Gaara and Fu. Gaara himself had an ability to manipulate sand of all things to great effect, and on top of that was clearly unstable. Fu, on the other hand, had barely shown anything outside of the fact that she had a wail that hurt worse than Sakura's and Ino's greatest fangirl shrieks combined. The two of them were also Jinchuriki, and according to the fox, clearly had at least some working knowledge of the benefits that came with that burden. He, however, couldn't boast such a thing, though the fox had hinted at a few abilities he could possess. It had given no definite answers. Of course, the fox really wasn't all that talkative at all, and gave the blonde the feeling that he was currently being tested. Half an hour later he emerged from the bathroom with steam billowing out behind him, dressed in a simple pair of gray cotton sweatpants and a white tank top, along with a pair of black slip-on sandals that he only wore around his apartment. As he emerged, however, he stopped short upon finding 4 people had entered into his apartment. 3 people weren't so bad. Sasami, Yoshi, and Eri pretty much came and went as they pleased. It was the 4th, however, that stopped him cold. Forget the fact that he hadn't ever seen the man, at least to his knowledge, and he was lounging on his couch seemingly without a care in the world. No, what brought him up short was something much more important as far as the blonde was concerned: my ramen. said the blonde, eyebrow twitching dangerously. Ha, definitely Kushina's kid. Find a strange man in the house, and the most important thing is that I'm eating your ramen, said the man, causing both Eri and Yosho to sigh while the blonde smiled, pleased with the comparison. So what's going on? Questioned the blonde. We wanted to inform you of what will be happening for the next month leading up to the finals, stated Eri, causing Naruto to immediately stand straighter, though it was Jiraiya who spoke up next. For the next month I'll be in charge of your training. First and foremost, we will be traveling to a location outside of the village where your training will be held. There you will be put through more advanced taijutsu, chakra control, and ninjutsu training. You will also be signing the Toad summoning contract, and I will begin instructing you in Fuinjutsu. Finally, I want to get you started on learning to control the Kyuubi's chakra, stated Jiraiya. I will likewise continue your Kenjutsu lessons as well as your etiquette lessons, while Eri will work to continue your general education in preparation for our departure. And when are we supposed to start with this? Questioned the blonde, knowing that this was actually quite the workload. Right now we were just waiting for you to get out of the shower, stated Jiraiya, tossing the blonde a scroll which he recognized as the storage scroll that held his gear. Fine, let me get dressed, stated the blonde as he turned back to enter his room. Sakura sighed as she walked through the doors of her home, already envisioning crashing out on her bed. After the thorough ass-kicking she'd gotten from Hinata, she had been confined to the hospital for several hours due to the fact that they had needed to wait for her tenketsu to open before the doctors could treat her. While the doctors could have treated her, it would have put her through more pain to force her tenketsu open. Because her injuries weren't that threatening, they decided that it would be easier and less painful for her to let her own chakra open her tenketsu naturally, even if it would take longer. The time lying on the bed had given her a couple of hours to think. Her mother had constantly told her that if she was going to continue down this road and be a kunoichi, she had to take it seriously. After getting out of the academy, she had thought that's what she had been doing. She did 50 push-ups and sit-ups a day, 25 in the morning and another 25 at night. During team training, she always finished whatever exercise Kakashi had tasked her with as well, so she thought she had been doing well. Hinata had proven, however, she hadn't. In fact, she hadn't even seen much as Hinata had laid into her, and in fact her body had just been reacting to the strikes that the other girl had delivered to her. If that wasn't enough, then seeing just how far Naruto had come in just a couple of months had truly forced her to take stock in the situation. After all, he had went from being easily beaten in the academy to beating on Sasuke as if their roles had reversed, and putting out so much chakra that it was actually visible surrounding him. Her thoughts were broken as she looked up at the sight of her parents, moving around the room, obviously packing. She and her mother were almost mirror images of each other, with the exception of the fact that her mother, Haruno Mabuki, stood at 5 feet 6 inches and wore her long pink hair in a tail that fell to the end of her back. Her eyes were brown, one of the few differences between them, and of course she was much more mature in the development area with her curvy figure and large C-cup breast. You wouldn't know it as looking at her, but she was like all of the mothers of Sakura's social circle, a chunin-ranked shinobi, currently in charge of the shinobi library. By trade she was a librarian, which explained Sakura's love of books once you thought about it. Her father, Haruno Kizashi, was only a few inches taller, standing at 5 feet 8 inches, and had long red hair styled into the shape of a cherry blossom and blue eyes. He was currently carrying 3 travel bags as he descended the stairs down to the first floor of the house. He was the first to spot her, considering she was standing in front of the door, and made quick work of placing down his burden and gathered her up in his arms, though he held her gingerly, obviously already knowing of injuries. So what's going on? Questioned the genin as she was placed on her feet. Well, your mother decided that we're going to be taking a little trip. Jiraiya breathed out a deep, relaxing breath as he stood in his spot as the others around him rested. It had taken 3 hours, judging by the position of the sun, for them to reach their current position, and he had to admit, if only to himself, that he was impressed. He had paced himself at the standard speed of a chunin, and Yosho, Eri and Sasami had been able to keep up, though the 2 females were the ones currently using the opportunity to rest due to the current path they had to take. They were surrounded on all sides by forest, however in front of them was a step hill with stone steps leading up it for about 3 miles as far as their eyes could see, though Jiraiya knew it stretched further. Finally, after he deemed they had taken enough time to rest, Jiraiya led the group as they made their way up the stairs, taking their time and walking. As they walked, he took the opportunity to regale the blonde with a few stories of his departed student and his wife, which he listened to with rapt attention. Finally, nearly an hour after they began their ascent up the stairs, the group was greeted to the sight of a pair of large gates that were currently closed. Looking upon the gates, they could tell that they were exactly like the ones found at Konoha's main entrance, and as such they towered over them easily. Jiraiya merely walked up to the gates and without hesitation in a single moment delivered a palm strike into the center of the gates. The effects were immediate, as not only did the sound of flesh striking wood sound out, but the gates swung open in an instant, something that causing Naruto, Eri and Sasami to gape wide-eyed and drop-jawed. While Yosho managed to maintain his composure relatively well, his eyes were still wide. As the gates opened, the group was greeted to the sight of a large temple, which actually made Yosho feel right at home. Looking around, they found that straight ahead of them was actually quite breathtaking, as the place was obviously well maintained. On each side of them the ground was lowered about 6 inches, and instead of grass it was simply solid ground. The stone path they currently stood on led up from the staircase to the foot of what Yosho guessed was the main hall, while what he figured was the lecture hall was situated off to the right. "Well, you certainly took your sweet time getting here," came a voice, catching everyone's attention. Looking up towards the direction it came from, the group was greeted to the sight of an old woman who stood at perhaps 5 feet 3 inches. She had shoulder-length hair that had long since grayed but still held a bit of a pink tint to it, and brown eyes. She wore a pair of white pants and a long-sleeved white shirt, over which she wore a deep red robe held closed by a green obi, which did well to match the green trim on the outer edge of her robe. Finally, she wore a pair of purple closed-toed shoes that only went up to her ankles but matched well with the purple trim on the upper portion of the robe's inner edges. As she looked over the group, her eyes lingered on Yosho for several moments before they locked onto Naruto. "Well, come on in, slacker, and you can introduce the extras you decided to bring," stated the old woman. A few minutes later found the group all sitting within an empty room within the main building. The woman herself had sat herself cross-legged in the center of the room on the floor, while all the rest of them likewise found a place to settle. As he sat himself down, Naruto was studying the woman. She reminded him of the Sandaime, as despite their appearance age-wise both of them gave off this subtle presence, as if they were just harmless old people. But Naruto knew better. He remembered once years ago he had been with the old man when someone had done something that they shouldn't. The old man hadn't spoken a single word, yet the feeling of everything around him had changed. However, instead of being terrified like everyone else, Naruto had been filled with awe. It had been the instant where the thought of becoming Hokage had been impressed upon him. Now, looking upon this woman, she gave off the same vibe, which told him she was actually dangerous. "Well, slacker, mind telling me who these people are, and why you brought them here?" stated the woman. "Of course, sensei. The man is Masaki Yosho, and with him is his wife Masaki Eri. The young girl is his sister Sasami," said Jiraiya. "I see Kushina's parents. I suppose I can forgive you for bringing them here in this instance then," stated the woman, getting Jiraiya to release a breath he'd been holding. "This one would obviously be young Naruto. He looks almost exactly like Minato at that age. His hair is slightly darker and he has a different facial structure, but it's still almost like looking back in time," mused the woman. "If I may ask, what is your relation to Minato-san?" questioned Yosho. "He was my son," stated the woman, causing Naruto's eyes to widen in shock. "If that is the case, why was Naruto not raised here by you?" questioned Eri. "That is quite the complicated answer. But the most obvious answer is because the hidden villages believe me to be dead. My true name is Tatsuki Miyako," started the woman. "The heiress of the Tatsuki clan. I thought you looked familiar," stated Yosho. "I can't believe this. The Galaxy Police have been looking for you for nearly 600 years, and you mean to say you've been on this planet the entire time?" stated Eri, her head falling into her hands in disbelief. "Well, it's not like I could leave. My ship is still on Jurai. Besides, I like it here and my mother was from here," stated the woman, shrugging her shoulders. Still, Naruto was supposed to be raised here. In fact, that was the plan. However, from what I understand, when Jiraiya tried to bring him here under the guise of taking him in himself, the village council denied it, stating that he was a very important figure for the village and couldn't just leave. Furthermore, they wouldn't let a Jinchuriki, a newly born one at that, live outside of their village. He also could not come outright, and say he was bringing the baby to me as no one there knew who I was. Also, due to other factors, we couldn't even announce his heritage in order to protect him from his parents' enemies. So instead, I, through Jiraiya, have taken care of all of his expenses, which was the most I could do with my hands tied," stated the woman. "Now then, Jiraiya, from my understanding he should be only just exiting the academy a few months ago, so why have you brought him here now and not after his first year of service as planned?" questioned Miyako. "A few reasons. Firstly, when they came to the Leaf, they made no attempt to hide their origins and as such revealed Kushina's. Following this, Sarutobi-sensei decided to reveal the full scope of Naruto's heritage, so I figured I may as well knock this last revelation out while we were at it. Finally, there is one last reason. Recently he had the Kyuubi removed from the seal, however after a scan covertly done by a medic named Kakashi found out that he has an imbalance in his chakra with a ratio of 65 to 35 in favor of his yang chakra. So we put the Kyuubi's power core back in as a sort of band-aid solution. Finally, from what Sensei explained, the Gaki actually used a ray gun during the Chunin exam preliminaries. With an imbalance like you're saying, it should be utterly impossible for him to use that technique, even if it is a basic technique. Also, from what I know, Minato only sealed the yang chakra into Naruto, so only that kind of chakra has been added to his system. We'll have to do a transfusion to balance out his chakra though, and I'm guessing we'll be using the rest of the month as training time for the main exam," stated Miyako, getting a nod from the Sannin. "Alright, I'll prepare a room for the procedure. In the meantime, show them to some rooms of their own," stated Miyako as she got up and left the room. "Well, Gaki, you took that better than I thought," said Jiraiya as he turned to look at the blonde who didn't respond. "Naruto-kun?" questioned Sasami, tapping the blonde only for him to fall over. He had fainted with his eyes open. Elsewhere, another old man could be seen at his desk with a huge stack of papers placed upon it. In appearance he was very short, with a triangular beard and a mustache that has angular corners, a big red nose and thick eyebrows. The top of his head is completely bald, although he has long white hair on the lower half of his head which is styled in a traditional Chanmage haircut, the back of which is tied with a yellow ribbon into a topknot. He wore a green and yellow coat with a red collar underneath, which he wears the standard outfit consistent with his village except with a light green version of the village's flak jacket and mesh armor. He, however, has both his sleeves of his shirt, but kept the single lapel on his right side. This man was the Sandaime Tsuchikage known as Ryutenbin no Inoki. At the moment he was looking upon a missive that had arrived not 5 minutes ago by way of Konoha and from the Sandaime Hokage of all people. Over the years he had come to respect his counterpart, still hated him and wouldn't hesitate to kill him, but he respected the man. You couldn't live through all 3 great shinobi wars as the two of them had and not come to respect others that had did the same, and fought on the front lines. The missive itself explained that a leaders' summit was to be held in Konoha on the day following the Chunin exam final tournament, the subject matter of which could determine the future of not just the hidden villages, but the entire world. As such, not only were the 5 Kages to attend, but so were the daimyo of all the countries and the heads of the minor villages and countries. He narrowed his eyes, seeing 2 specific names requested to come as part of his entourage. What the hell are you thinking? Furthermore, what's so important that the whole of the elemental nations need to be involved? The old man thought to himself. The truth of the matter was there had never been a full gathering of all of the world's leaders under one roof. It was rare just to see the 5 Kages all gathered together. In fact, it had only happened once during the era of the Shodais. It had been that meeting that determined the 5 great villages, as each of the villages would command at least one of the Bija. Frowning, he set about writing a few missives of his own, at least thankful he'd be able to leave the paperwork for a while. Later that night found Sarutobi Hiruzen sitting within his office with a serious frown adorning his features. Across from him stood Kakashi calmly, though with his book conspicuously absent from his hand. At the moment the masked jounin had just finished informing him of some of the troubles that had befallen on him during the day, these being Yakushi Kabuto's attempted murder, and the inability of anyone being able to find him, a search he himself had been participating in along with several squads of A and BU members. For the duration of the training break I want you to take Sasuke out of the village and train him, stated Hiruzen after several moments of thought. While I understand the motive for that, what about Sakura? The original plan was for me to focus my attention on her and Sasuke equally this month while Naruto's off with Jiraiya," stated Kakashi. "True enough, however, Haruno Mabuki has requested the month off for her entire family so she and Kizashi could work on Sakura's training themselves. They'll be leaving in the morning." That Kakashi could understand, as it was not unheard of for parents to request time off to personally train their children, and in Sakura's case he could definitely see her benefiting from the training. While not jounin level, her parents were actually well known in their respective fields. Mabuki specialized in barrier techniques and had been so skilled in the area she had been placed on the village's barrier squad, which due to their job duties and importance paid out like a continuous S-ranked assignment. Kizashi, on the other hand, was one of the best kenjutsu practitioners in the village, second only to Gekyo Hate in the art, however was only ranked chunin due to the fact that he'd yet to master his elemental chakra. Currently the man was on the reserve list due to the fact that he was covering for his own father as the head of the Merchants Guild after the man had a heart attack a few months ago. "I see. I'll collect Sasuke as soon as the medics clear him," said Kakashi, getting a nod, a clear dismissal before he left. The morning found Sasami, Yosho, Eri, Jiraiya and Miyako up in shock and a bit of awe as the sixth member of the group, young Naruto, went about as a blur. Everywhere they looked they could see copies of the blonde at work, many of them running or trying to run the surface of the surrounding trees. Unknown to them, Naruto had also sent clones out to explore, and many of them had stumbled upon a beach to which they had taken to training the water walking technique. Despite this, none of them had awoken due to noise made. Instead, it had been the level and the pure potency of his power that had forced their attention upon him. The procedure had been a true success. Unknowing of his audience, the real Naruto stood still as he took it all in. When he'd first woken up, he'd felt better than he had ever felt in his life. After emerging from the temple, he decided to get a bit of early morning training in, and went to create some clones, only to create 400, whereas before, even at his max, he could only make around 150. Even still, these clones were different, whereas before they would dispel with even the slightest bit of damage. These were taking some serious damage to dispel. He hadn't even felt one dispel until it lost control of its chakra and blasted off from a tree and smashed its leg against another one, which ended up breaking the limb and dispelling the clone. Before that, it had witnessed others having things happen yet not dispelling even when they were scratched enough to draw blood. In fact, the wound would just heal right up. His attention was soon pulled in another direction when an extremely thick sheet of fog appeared seemingly from out of nowhere from deeper in the forest, causing his eyes to widen. In the forest, when he'd used the move during the second exam, it had taken some time to gather enough mist just for that small clearing, yet this mist had rolled in like a breeze and was even covering the majority of the massive trees that surrounded him. Thinking to himself for a moment, Naruto held out his hand and concentrated, getting immediately yet unexpected results. Instead of the hand-sized ball of power that had taken him forever just to create once in Nami no Kuni, this time he got a gargantuan sphere big enough to contain a man, larger than even Jiraiya, that he was forced to hold over his head. "Holy shit, dude!" exclaimed one of the clones, stopping what it was doing and gaping with a dropped jaw in action many of the others copied. Looking up at the massive ball, Naruto let his control slip from the top, immediately causing the giant sphere to rupture, the amount of power inside forming a giant tornado that stood and spun for nearly a minute, ripping the unprepared clones from their positions and forcefully dispelling them as they were ripped apart once sucked inside before the thing faded. "Alright Gaki, I think that's enough messing around, don't you?" called Jiraiya, catching the blonde's attention. "Okay, what did you guys do? I've never had this much power before," said Naruto as he made his way up. "It's not that you didn't have it, but that you couldn't use it. Your chakra imbalance was very lopsided, with it basically being almost completely physical. Because of this and the nature of chakra and jutsu, it caused you to force out more chakra in order to get jutsu to work, and even then not at their full potential. Think of it as if you had been carrying weights on you your entire life without any knowledge of it. It forces the muscles to grow stronger, but you're still straining to use them. Now that your chakra ratio has been fixed, it's like removing the weights, and after giving your body a bit of time to relax, you start moving at full speed, whereas before you were moving at half that speed," explained Miyako. If he would have been the same person he was in the academy, that explanation would have flown right over his head. Instead, with the knowledge he had gained, he was easily able to understand it, and simply nodded that understanding. Before anyone else could speak, however, Naruto found Jiraiya standing in front of him just as someone new burst onto the scene, leaping out of the trees in a blur only to slide to a stop in an instant. Looking over the woman, Naruto found himself raising a curious eyebrow at the disturbingly familiar-looking woman, though he was sure he'd never seen her before. "Mom!" called another voice, one that he actually was familiar with. True enough, not several moments later emerged the familiar form, his kunoichi teammate, along with another person, this one a man who was fingering the hilt of a sword. Pushing past Jiraiya, he stood forward, causing Sakura to blink in shock. At the same time, Naruto was also a bit shocked as he realized why the other woman had seemed so familiar. She was an older, hotter version of Sakura. "Naruto? What in the world are you doing here?" questioned Sakura. "I was going to ask you the same thing. I was told not many people knew about this place," said the blonde evenly. "Well, it seems the entire family is here. Let's talk inside," said Miyako. Several minutes later found the large group once again gathered within the same room within the main building they had gathered in the previous day, only now with the addition of Sakura and who she had introduced as her parents. For a while no one said anything as the Harino family settled themselves while the members of Clan Masaki watched them curiously. "I wished a lot of you would have let me know you were all coming up here," stated Miyako with a sigh. "Well, I wasn't planning on it until I got word of how Sakura did in the Chunin exams and decided it was time she got more hands-on training," stated the older Sakura. "I see. I suppose it's good you came anyway. At least I can get this out of the way. I'd like to introduce the three of you to Masaki Yosho, his wife Eri, and his sister Sasami. The white-haired man is my old student Jiraiya of the Sannin, and you already know of young Naruto here, I'm sure," stated Miyako. "I'm sorry, but how could that young girl be your sister? You look old enough to be her grandfather," said Mabuki, only to be shocked as Yosho's image wavered and in his place was a much younger man. "Well, the truth of the matter is I'm not that much older than her, and I've gotten rather used to keeping up my illusion," stated Yosho calmly. "It's been quite a few years since I've seen you, Mabuki," stated Jiraiya. "You as well, Jiraiya-sama. I'm glad to see you in good health," stated the woman. "How exactly do you know her?" questioned Naruto as he turned to the sage. "Well, she and your father were actually quite close, so close in fact that he called her his sister," stated Jiraiya, shocking the blonde. "That isn't just a saying. Minato and Mabuki are twins," stated Miyako, shocking everyone. "Wait, what?" questioned Naruto, turning to the elder woman. "I never said Minato was my only child." Hiruzen assumed that, and I made no move to correct him. The two of them being fraternal twins meant that the subject of their relation was never brought up, as really the two of them don't look anything alike. While Mabuki, as you can all see, received her looks from me, Minato is a mix of my father and his father," explained Miyako. "Wait, what are you talking about? You've never mentioned our father," said Mabuki, with good reason. "Because I didn't, and Hiruzen knew to keep his mouth shut. The two of you got to lead your own lives," stated Miyako. "So their situation was just like my own, hidden and as such not forced into the shadows of their father," stated Naruto. "Indeed, not only would they have had to deal with being known as children of the Nidaime Hokage, but as heirs to the Senju clan," stated Jiraiya, shaking his head. "Wait, didn't Sandaime-sama say that Yandaime-sama was the son of the Nidaime? But if that's the case, and he is actually my mom's brother, then that would make me and Naruto," stated Sakura with wide, shocked eyes. "Indeed, the two of you are cousins," stated Miyako. "But in that same vein, it would make Sakura an heir of Jiraiya," stated Naruto. "Okay, where did that leap in logic come from?" questioned Kizashi with narrowed eyes. "It is no leap, but an actual fact. As I told all of you, there are many secrets buried in my past. For instance, the reason that you Mabuki were able to attend school within the capital with the children of the Fire Daimyo is because at one point I worked training the bodyguards of the Daimyo. At that point I went by the name of Genkai, and it was during that time that I met Tobirama. However, before that, before I became stranded and forced to live on this planet, I was called by my true name of Tatsuki Miyako, and I am the heiress of one of Jiraiya's 4 noble clans," stated Miyako. "Okay, I'm confused," stated Mabuki. "Not surprising. Not long ago the council was made aware of certain things, and the majority of it was classified by Hokage-sama's law as an S-class secret. As you know, such secrets are punishable by death. However, as this secret now concerns our family, I suppose I can share it with you. From the information packets we received, it was revealed that Jiraiya is a planet far from our own which is considered to be the center of civilization, which controls several galaxies worth of planets. Stated Kazashi. Okay, are there any more revelations that need to be revealed? Any more long-lost relatives I need to know about? Anybody? Last chance for more life-altering news here. No, good. I've got training to do, honestly. With that, the blonde got up and left the room, all the while everyone could only sweat drop as the boy muttered all the way out the door. Well, he took all this better than I thought he would. Stated Jiraiya after a few moments, only for a loud explosion to suddenly rock the place. 10 minutes later, the large group came outside to find the blonde laughing as he was lay sprawled out on the ground, and a large tongue went about licking his face. Okay, you caught me. I am Chan, get off. Called the boy, only for the large hellhound to lick him once more before moving back and allowing him to sit up. While most wouldn't be able to tell the three creatures apart, it was quite easy for him to do so. The trick was all in the eyes, as Iam had violet eyes, Kamiko had red eyes, and the third, whom he named Haku, had blue eyes. The group could only watch as the large beast circled around him before lying down and resting its head in his lap. As the group moved to approach, the beast only opened a single eye and looked at them before closing it again. Taking that as a sign to approach, they stopped dead as two more emerged from out of the forest. However, Eri and Sasami didn't stop, and soon they too were sitting comfortably petting one of Naruto's pet hellhounds on the head. Kazashi himself found the sight odd, as he remembered watching the three of them pin down a trio of A and B with ease during a council meeting. Sakura's first memory of them, however, was much more memorable, as it was full of blood and body parts, and as such made her extremely weary of the creatures. Agaki, break time's over, called Jiraiya, getting the blonde's attention. So how's this going to work? Questioned the blonde, not moving from his seated position as everyone else gathered around him. Well, for one thing, Gaki, as you've demonstrated earlier, we need to get your chakra back under control and if possible improve it even further. Also, Kakashi has made me aware of what he's been teaching you taijutsu-wise, and will further that training, as well as Kakashi was only allowed to learn the basics of that style. Along with taijutsu, we're going to be working on improving your speed and strength, and we'll start you on some basic fuinjutsu. Finally, we'll be working to expand your catalog of ninjutsu, explained Jiraiya. Back within the village, the devil princess of Jurai, Kamiki Sito Jurai, sat with an elegant poise as she took a sip of tea. Across from her sat Huga Hayashi, the head of the Huga clan, along with two members of his clan's elder council. Sitting the cup of tea down, she regarded them calmly, their emotionless mask doing little to unsettle her, as she placed her hands in her lap. Lady Kamiki, by your presence here I assume that our proposal has been looked over, stated one of the elders. Indeed it has, and after a discussion between himself and Hinata-san, Naruto has agreed to accept her as a bride, stated Sito. Well, then there is only the discussion of the tribute to be made to marry into the clan, stated another elder, causing the woman to raise an eyebrow. You misunderstand. While Naruto has indeed accepted her, your contract has not been signed, stated Sito, causing all the Hyugas to pause. First and foremost, you should understand that Naruto will not be marrying into your clan. Instead, Hinata will be marrying into his. As such, upon their union, she will take the Masaki name as her own, unless they are here, in which case they will use the Uzumaki name. Your name and status, while having significant importance here, means nothing within the vastness of the Jurai Empire. The name Masaki means everything, as it is the name of not only the founder of Jurai and our empire, but the name of the current emperor, and in all truthfulness it is your status that is being raised. Second, the bloodline protection seal you wanted to have placed on Hinata. Sarutobi Dano has told us all about it, and I will tell you now that there is no way that it will be placed on her or any of her children. As it stands, Naruto has a very high chance of taking the throne once our current emperor steps down. With that in mind, we cannot allow his wife to be subservient to anyone in any way, shape, or form. Furthermore, slavery has been outlawed throughout the entirety of the empire, and while we do not like to interfere with the goings-on of other places too much, the relationship this clan would have to Clan Masaki, and as such Jurai, will be under much scrutiny. As such, if you wish this union to take place, all of the seals must be removed. Preposterous, there is no way we can do such a thing. That seal is the only thing, started one of the elders only to be cut off as Sito suddenly glowered, all pleasantness gone from her features. Let's get this straight. That abomination isn't meant to protect your bloodline as you like to claim, otherwise all of you would have won. Now instead that is a marking of forced subjugation, of slavery, and something your Hokage hasn't been able to deal with due to the laws put in place by your village's founders. The truth of the matter, however, is you aren't so much worried about the protection of a bloodline, but you are worried of the repercussions of your actions coming back to hit you once those poor people are free of your control over them. That, however, would be a problem of your own making, and I won't allow your problems to place a stain on the reputation of the Imperial House of Jiraiya, something I have spent the last 1,000 years to build up. You have created a negative situation, you will fix it in the appropriate manner or all talks between us will cease. Good day, gentlemen. With that, the Devil Princess rose from her seat, and with the grace of someone of her stature left the room, leaving 4 startled Huga clan members in her wake. Meanwhile, within the meeting room of another clan compound, Inuzuka paced back and forth through the room while a few members of her own council watched her go. Unlike other clans, the Inuzuka were a lot more rowdy, and as such they didn't have any type of seat or table within the room, as moving around helped them once they got agitated, which some clearly was. I don't get it. As far as suitors go, Hana is a jackpot. Not only is she an heiress, but she's a damn chunin, so obviously she can take care of herself. Hell, they've interacted enough times where he should have a decent feel of her character over the years, and I don't even have to mention her looks. Ranted the woman as she paced. For their part, the council members simply watched her, not even bothering to hide their amused looks. Unlike with the Huga clan, the Inuzuka council didn't have much sway in the operations of the clan. In fact, they were more of a body for their alpha to field ideas with. Sure, they helped with the day-to-day operations of the clan, but at the end of the day, the final decision always rested with the alpha. That was pack mentality. Also, unlike a lot of clans, they didn't gain their leaders due to succession. Instead, it was the member with the most bite to back up their bark that was eventually elevated to the position of alpha. Sim, despite her relatively small size compared to her male counterparts, had been a shoo-in, as her time as a genin under Jiraiya had put spotlights on her from an early age, and she had eventually become the single most vicious member of their clan, even if she wasn't the strongest physically. Well, according to the missive we received, it is due to his relationship, or rather the lack of relationship in regards to our partners, stated one of the council members, Hideki. Hideki had the rather obvious appearance of an Inuzuka clan member with short-cut but spiky black hair and feral-looking brown eyes. The clan markings on each side of his face added to his feral-like appearance, and he had a rather strong build, standing at 5 feet 10 inches with a torso that was bulging with muscles. Not surprising, most animals are wary of him, stated another, this one female, Kigali. She had spiky brown hair that fell to her shoulders along with the clan's signature feral eyes and clan markings. She was only a few inches shorter than some at 5 feet 1 inch, and there was a running joke that you should add another 2 feet for her attitude. It's because of his chakra, stated another of the counselors, bringing attention to himself. What do you mean? Questioned Sim. As you all know, animals, whether trained or untrained, have a better feeling for chakra than humans. Garudameru ran across him once and told me it was like the boy's chakra was literally clashing inside of his body. He said it was like being back in the Third Shinobi War all over again. Explained Hideki. You don't believe that's the real reason, do you? Questioned a different counselor. What are you thinking, Jin? Questioned Sim. Unlike the others, Jin didn't have the standard feral-like appearance of an Inuzuka. His father had married someone from outside of the clan, and as a result Jin had been born with features similar to her own. For instance, his black hair was not shaggy or spiky naturally, but he kept it cut short so that it came up in spikes. His eyes were not slanted but round, and his temperament was actually much more reserved than the norm for an Inuzuka. With his mother's influence, he had developed a fondness for reading at an early age and had become fascinated with mystery stories to the point that his own deductive skills had actually flourished as he had developed an eye for detail. With that and the keen senses gifted to him as an Inuzuka, he was always able to find anyone or anything he was after. It was for that reason she had not been surprised when he had been invited to join the intelligence division, a first for their clan. While it may be true that our partners don't initially take well to his presence, Akamaru is proof enough that it is something they are able to get used to. That pup doesn't so much as twitch in his presence anymore. stated Jin, giving each of the others pause as they remembered the shivering, whimpering mess the pup had been after his initial meeting with Naruto. Now what if I told you his reasoning was something much different for turning down our offer of Hana? Something that in normal situations would not be looked at as favorably as his given reason. Stated Jin, now having everyone's attention. What could it be then? Questioned Kigali with a frown. Kiba. Stated Jin, simply causing Tsum to narrow her eyes. The relationship between Naruto and Kiba, as well as Akimichi, Choji, and Nara Shikamaru, is much closer than they allow it to appear in public. Stated Jin, elaborating a bit. Go on. Said Tsum, her curiosity piqued. In no time at all a week had passed, and Jiraiya had to admit that he was impressed, all things considered. He had always considered Minato as something special, a once-in-a-generation genius when it came to the shinobi arts. But Naruto was proving to have just as much, if not even more, potential than Minato had. With Minato, things had seemed to come to him easy after a bit of time, and he had never required much instruction. Naruto, however, was the type of student teachers would kill for. First and foremost, he wanted to learn and had no problem letting it be known, and it wasn't just ninjutsu he was after. Instead, everything he touched he went at it with 100% focus. It showed a hunger that not many possessed. The problem with most shinobi now was that they just wanted to be good. Even the clan heirs would settle for good. Naruto didn't want to be good, or even great. Instead, he wanted to be the greatest. As such, in just that one short week he had gone from novice to a decent seal maker capable of creating storage scrolls and explosive tags without problem, and even improving the designs. His chakra control had improved by leaps and bounds, as had his taijutsu, and though Miyako was not giving many details, the fact that she was giving positive feedback at all was enough. Jiraiya hadn't actually started teaching him any new jutsu at that point. Instead, he had made the boy go back over all the ones he knew, as with his new balance of chakra he had been pouring way too much power into the moves. As it was, Naruto had finally gotten his control to a level where he was able to use the moves in the way they were supposed to be used, and not in ridiculously overpowered ones that would most likely kill him once he decided to try and use it. As such, Jiraiya felt now was as good a time as any to begin ninjutsu training. Alright, Gaki, the first technique I'm going to teach you is classified as a C rank. Despite the low ranking, however, the jutsu is a rare one, and in all actuality it is a game changer. As he finished speaking, Jiraiya bit his thumb and Naruto's eyes widened as with a few quick seals the sage slammed his hands to the ground and vanished in a cloud of smoke. Swiftly the smoke was blown away to show the man standing atop of a very large toad. The toad had orange skin, is covered in blue markings with bandages wrapped around its body and left foreleg, along with a necklace with 7 large beads on it, with the kanji for loyalty on the central, largest one. All in all, Naruto thought the massive toad was cool, especially as it was orange, and orange was still awesome. Alright, Gaki, this is Gama, the holder of the toad's summoning contract. As should be obvious, the first technique I'm going to teach you is the Kuchios no Jutsu. At the words, the toad dropped the scroll which had been held secure by its tongue. As it hit the ground, Naruto was surprised slightly as it unrolled so that an empty slot rested in front of him before it just stopped moving. Looking the thing over, he saw that it actually had quite a few names written in it, though the ones that took the most notice were Jiraiya's, and the last one, which was his father's. Following Jiraiya's direction, he bit into his right thumb enough to draw blood and quickly went about writing his name Uzumaki Naruto in the scroll, along with placing down his handprint as well. Alright, Gaki, I know you already know the basics, as I've seen you summon those 3 dogs of yours. However, the difference is that the amount of chakra vary for each class and size of summon. Give it a try. Let's see what you can do, stated Jiraiya before taking several steps back. For several long moments Naruto was still as he slowly built up his chakra. In his training to better control the well of energy he had at his disposal, he had discovered that it was often better to take his time with things instead of just rushing in as he was used to. At this point his control was leaps and bounds better than it had ever been, but even still he didn't want to risk overpowering this jutsu and summoning something too big for the space they were occupying. Finally, however, he determined he'd collected a decent amount of chakra, and after biting his thumb once more sped through the quick chain of seals before slamming his hand to the ground and releasing the chakra in the same instant. Immediately there was a large cloud of smoke that appeared that covered him from view, only for it to quickly be blown away. As the smoke cleared, it revealed a large toad standing before him that was a dark orange color, and had on a pair of metal bracers on its forelimbs, and a metal chest and back plate for armor, causing Jiraiya to whistle. "Not bad, Gaki. First try and you summoned Gamahiko, and here I thought you would summon a tadpole or something," stated Jiraiya. In another area of the property, Miyako sat calmly as she overlooked a group of Naruto clones at work. Spread out were 16 clones, 8 on either side of her, all of them balancing on the tip of a needle using only a single finger. She could tell quite a few of them were glaring at her heatedly, but she didn't let it faze her. Instead, she merely moved her chopsticks from the bowl in her lap and elevated the ramen they held to her mouth. "How much longer do we have to do this?" questioned one of the clones, gritting its teeth. Well, about 2 hours have passed, so 10 more hours to go," stated the woman, causing all of the clones to whimper. Hearing this sound caused something deep within her being to glow with warmth. It had been quite a while since the last time she'd had someone to train, and it always provided her such great entertainment. The last group that had come up to be trained by her had been especially entertaining. However, Naruto was family, and from what she'd been able to learn, he had unknowingly began learning the techniques of her own style. Not only did he use the basic form of her taijutsu style, but from what Jiraiya had told her, he'd actually managed to use her ray gun technique, something which no one else had been able to pull off. That was one of the reasons she had for the clones doing the current exercise. Not only would it help boost Naruto's chakra control, but his control over the ray gun would improve dramatically, as would the potency and power of the technique once he got used to channeling chakra to his fingers. From there, she would be able to take him further into the real training in her Reiko Hataken Taijutsu. That, however, was for later, after the clones completed the exercise or dispelled, whichever came first. Regardless, she was sure the next few weeks would prove entertaining. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow Savage Thor for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.